Good evening. I'd like to call the July 11th, 2017 Longmont City Council meeting to order. This is a regular session. Could we please start with a roll call?
Yes, Mayor Coombs.
Here.
Council members Bagley.
Here.
Christensen. Here. Finley. Here. Moore.
Here.
Peck. Here. Santos.
Here.
Mayor Coombs, we have a quorum.
Anyone wishing to, let's first stand for Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Anyone wishing to speak at first call, public invited to be heard, will need to add his or her name to the list outside the council chambers. Only those on the list will be invited to speak at first call, public invited to be heard. Speakers who do not place their name on the list will have an opportunity to speak at final call, public invited to be heard, and also on any of the second hearing items tonight. So, Council Member Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I've had a few conversations with historic East Side neighborhood residents here lately. Several issues are coming up, but there's one in particular that I think I'd like to get a move on. I think as a council, we want to maintain the character of the historic district. And so I was thinking that during our code updates that we could put some protection on the historical nature and the architecture of those buildings in that east and west side districts. You know, things like architectural elements in their building designs, so that we don't slap down a 1960s ranch house between two Victorians, which is this example I was given. So I'd like to know, do you have anything, Harold, that would add to that?
No, I think if it's council's desire to look at that type of overlay, it would essentially be a zoning overlay for the area that would incorporate some of the architectural design elements that you would want to keep in the neighborhood to keep the integrity of the neighborhood in the future. There's different ways that you could approach that I've seen in my career, where it could be just a general overlay. If there was a deviation from the overlay, then it would have to have a variance. What I've seen in the last community I was working in along the river, they had a zoning overlay for the river, and they had a river corridor committee that would review those. So there's different methods that you could utilize, but the overlay and the zoning in that area would be the primary piece.
All right, thank you. I think that I'd like to ask staff to move forward with that in their code amendments and their updates, if council would be so inclined to do so.
Second.
Sure. Councilmember Christensen?
Yes, I think I've been hearing, well, for several years from constituents in both historic districts, especially East Side, about the impacts on their neighborhoods of new developments in terms of property value and quality of life, noise, parking, traffic, et cetera. And the city staff has been working on the major code updates for quite some time. And they're projected to be done by December, which isn't very long. This code update should encompass the direction of the Longmont Area Comprehensive Plan, which we've spent a lot of time on, and the advanced Longmont.
Can we, real quickly, I just want to stop you just briefly. We need to probably formally give direction as council on Jeff's, and then we'll continue.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Does everybody
okay.
support Jeff's direction?
See hands?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, Jeff was just asking for an overlay zoning.
So what I heard was ask staff to work on some type of, and this is my word, some type of zoning overlay for the historic east side and west side, so that, and have staff work on that and bring that back to council. That's what I heard was on that piece.
Okay.
And so if I can just make sure I can see everyone. Okay.
I have a question.
Okay, Councilmember Peck.
Thank you. So on this zoning overlay, how does this work with the codes? Because that is the thing that the codes are coming up to be updated.
So it would be part of that, and it would be, Don, you and I talked about this. I know Don's back here. So essentially, it would be part of the code in that overlay.
Good evening, Council. Don Burchett, Planning and Development Services. So as I understand what you're asking us to look at is as part of our code update, which we are in the throes of right now, you're asking for us to look at creating an overlay district that would affect the historic east side and west side neighborhoods, that would offer some kind of restrictions and protections from architectural, maybe incompatible uses, things like that, that would be specific for those two neighborhoods. And then that would then be adopted or brought forward to council for consideration with our code update.
So it sounds good. What I'm wondering is, would it be possible, or I would like to have some kind of input from perhaps the chair of the Historical East Side neighborhood when we are doing the overlay in the codes?
I would think
Is that possible to do that?
Yeah, we would probably engage the
Okay, that would be
neighborhood,
great.
And then we'll bring back different options,
Okay,
because there's more than one way to approach this.
great, then I agree. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Christensen.
Okay, now that we've solved that. So because we're working on the code update, and it needs to be led by the comp plan, which we've spent a lot of time doing, and also the advanced Longmont plan, which is a very good plan about the direction of the business community, and the sustainability plan, among others. Both the comprehensive plan and the code updates are going to include transition neighborhoods. And I would like to call for, well, this term was first explained to me about 4 years ago by Michael Schernick, who's an architect at our council retreat. And so I'm suggesting that we create a temporary moratorium on processing applications just until the code update has been completely approved, and I think it's ill-advised to proceed until we can solidify the applications and plans, because businesses need to know where they stand and property owners need to know where they stand. And this is an opportunity to avoid controversy and create consensus. We want development, but we need to have our best foot forward. And something that adds to our community unity and enhances our historic and creative district downtown and our historic neighborhoods.
Okay. I guess this probably needs some further discussion. You have to turn off your mics. Councilmember Finley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I would not be in favor of a moratorium. I think that call is to stop development that's already occurring, and it would not be fair to those who've already started the process. I think it's a great idea to have an overlay, but I don't think the moratorium is fair to those who are already working on projects. So I won't be voting for it.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Yeah, I have concerns about applications already in process. How long is this moratorium going to last? And that could be December. So we're in July. It is a very long. I would disagree with that. I would not be in favor of that either.
Councilmember Bagley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I guess my question is, I guess I fall somewhere in the middle, which is I don't think anybody cares if the right projects are going forward. What we want is to prohibit the wrong projects from going forward. We want a moratorium on all the wrong projects. So I guess my question is, what is the current process right now, and is there something we could do in the meantime to assure that, A, we're not violating the due process and taking away the property rights of those who are in development in the pipeline who want to do something with the property that is in accordance with the historical, beautiful nature of those neighborhoods, and at the same time, kind of give us a heads up or a red flag when someone wants to put up a 87 floor apartment building. I'm being somewhat exaggerative, but is there anything we can do, Mr. Burchett?
Mayor Coombs, members of council, the council can direct staff to bring back any ordinance that you would like, be that for a full moratorium or be that to set a date after which we would not accept any more applications until development code was updated. But I think you would need to speak with Eugene and his staff about how we would handle existing development applications that have already submitted and been determined to be complete in our process. Right now we have about 54 projects that are in that state right now. Some of those have not been reviewed yet, but they are scheduled out into the end of August for review dates. And then others are at second, third, and some at, unfortunately, a fourth review, waiting for revisions to be made. So there are projects, again, that haven't been reviewed yet, but they have been accepted into our system. And I think some of the concerns that I have heard about this last week have been about one project specific that is adjacent to the historic East Side neighborhood, and that is for the Longmont Association of Realtors building just north of 4th Avenue on Kimbark Street.
I think a clarification. So I heard a couple of things from Councilmember Christensen. So are you talking about a citywide moratorium, or are you talking about one that is specific to the transition area in the comp plan, which is historic East Side and historic West Side? So it's the latter on
Historic down, because we've been talking about because we've been talking about transitional zones for at least 4 years, and they are going to be part of the code update, and they're part of the Longmont Area Comprehensive Plan. So at least it would be prudent, I think, to behave as if that's part in the review process. Then I'm certainly not singling out any one project, because that's not fair, but to consider that.
Sorry,
just to consider these transition zones, which will become fact, and also to consider those in the process of reviewing these things right now.
So I think the reason why I asked is it's not 54 projects in the area that we defined just now. That's 54 projects in the entire community. So there's a difference in that. So I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Not the whole community, just the downtown development that borders on historic East Side and West Side.
Councilmember Finley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Councilmember Christensen just said those transition plans have been kicked around for 4 years or more. I just don't think that we can have a moratorium that will last until we can all agree on transition zones. I just don't think it's fair to those property owners, and I really don't think it's fair for folks who are already working with the city in their development process. Can you tell us, are there any criteria right now for buildings to fit into a neighborhood, or what that criteria would be?
Mayor Coombs, Councilmember Finley, the Central Business District zoning in our land development code does have some general compatibility language within it and regulations. It is not to the level that the council approved when we did the mixed-use zoning district down where we're doing the redevelopment of the Butterball property, or where we rezone the properties where Cotton Burton build Roosevelt Park Apartments. When we created the mixed-use zoning district for those areas, we specifically looked at some transition provisions within the regulations, and those were more specific to distances away. The compatibility standards within the Central Business District regulations are not at that same level. They're much less rigorous. and a little bit more, I would say, subjective is probably the best way to put it. But there are some.
Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Don, can you tell us where that particular project is in the process of in development review?
Certainly, Mayor Coombs, Councilmember Moore, the Longmont Association of Realtor Building has submitted. They were found complete, I believe, 2 weeks ago. Their project is scheduled for review. I believe it's the second week of August is when that's going to be reviewed. It has not been reviewed yet. The notices went out earlier this week. The neighbors received them, I believe, Monday or actually they went out last week right after the 4th, and they received them, I believe, Monday and today.
Okay. Eugene, is this moratorium workable, and is it a bait and switch on the current owner of those properties?
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. I have not been involved in conversations about this project. According to our rules of procedure, I would recommend that Council direct staff to bring this back in a future agenda so that we would have an opportunity to look at this. I would have to look at what applications are in process, where they are, and what our code provides, look at due process. I have not looked at this type of issue. The only other moratorium we had was prospectively prohibiting marijuana establishments at the time when the City Council was deciding on how to regulate or allow medical marijuana at that point.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've been hearing about this as well as part of the other conversations I've been having with the Historic East Side. I'm not quite at a point where I can support this. I think that there is a reason to think about holding up until we understand what the new code regulations will be for building height, for example, building mass, parking, all of that stuff. I don't think I have enough information to make an informed decision. So my suggestion would be to bring this back. Well, I think it was a motion that Councilmember Christensen to amend the motion to bring it back at a later time in a week or so.
I was kind of hoping to get the opportunity to sit down with staff or get more information. I'm not comfortable making a decision for a moratorium tonight. I am open to getting more information from feedback from staff, and maybe at a future council meeting making a decision then. Councilmember Peck?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. For me, I want to do this right. This is really the first time that that I have been on council that we've had a major transition area, and our historical neighborhoods are worth protecting, and our developers are worth making sure that everybody knows where we're going. For me, also, the transition area is just not about buildings. It's about parking in those transition areas, and it's about the impact on the neighborhood with this. And I think that we need to do our due diligence and not just rubber stamp it and go forward. I want to make sure that we look at a city in a transition area and do it so that we're proud of it, and so that buildings can come in here and be compatible, and that the neighbors in these, our neighbors living here, can experience growth in their homes, in their equity, and not have something that comes in just because the code says. If we look at it correctly, we can do an incredible downtown area and keep our historical neighborhoods, both on the east and the west. And I want to also remind you that Envision Longmont, the Sustainability Plan, Advanced Longmont, those are guidelines. They are to help us make this a good community. So it's just a good idea to look at everything in those documents and plan a great neighborhood. So So that's what I think we should do. Be involved with it, make sure it's done right, and move forward. So I agree that we can get more back from staff. Councilman Christensen, do you want to amend the motion or keep it?
I would amend it to bring it back for discussion as quickly as possible. And I would like to remind people that this more temporary moratorium has the support of the Historical Preservation Advisory Board, the majority of them. And whatever we do now sets precedent for our future development. So that's why I'm saying that if we do this before the code has been updated, if we proceed along with a lot of things that are it sets a precedent for how everything else will be developed. Thank you. But I would amend it to bring it back for discussion as soon as possible.
That'll work. I mean,
Okay.
I need to get with staff to see how long it will take to pull that information together,
Right.
so we can provide you with information for a robust conversation.
Right. And-
If we can do it fast, we will definitely. I mean, the agenda is going out tomorrow for the 8th,
Okay.
so or for the 25th or 18th. Sorry, I've got the wrong month here. For the 18th, so the 25th would be the most likely, if we're talking really
Okay.
soon. Based on workloads, it may be the 1st. I've just got to evaluate all of those pieces, but definitely the 25th or the 1st. If council wants it on the 25th, we'll definitely
Okay.
do what we can to bring
That
it
would
on
be
the 25th.
good. And I would suggest that Dido, I've forgotten her last name, but she did a very good PowerPoint presentation for historical preservation, and I'm sure she would be happy to do that for us again.
So we have no meeting on the 1st, so we'll do our best to get it on the 25th.
Okay, thank you.
We'll let you know if something comes up and that we can't get around.
Councilmember Moore?
So what, should I move it?
I just want to, just one comment, and that would be that it's time sensitive for the neighborhood, so let's try to do what we can to get it back as soon as possible. Councilmember Bagley and myself will both be out of town next week, so 25th is probably the best suggested time.
Okay, I guess do we have consensus on the motion just to bring this thing back to council? We're not making the decision tonight whether we're doing a moratorium, we're just bringing
An item back for discussion.
it back for discussion. So,
And I'm not seeing that, so can I see a show of me?
yeah,
Oh, you need to
Yeah.
vote? Okay.
right. Yeah, right. So let's vote on the amended motion. Okay. Okay, that passes 6-1 with Councilmember Finley abstaining. Okay, Valerie, are there any other agenda revisions?
No, Mayor Coombs, there aren't.
Is there a report from the city manager?
No report, Mayor, Council.
All right, I'll get to the fun part of the meeting. We have Tom Reinotis, our general manager of Longmont Power and Communications, is here to accept a proclamation. And I'm going to go ahead and read this proclamation. Proclamation naming Longmont as Colorado's first gigabit city, first gig city. Whereas Longmont is the first city in Colorado to offer symmetrical gigabit broadband service with no data caps to residents and businesses throughout the city, unleashing their creativity and enterprise to the betterment of all. And whereas Longmont Power and Communications has built the citywide NextLight fiber optic system without having used a single tax dollar, and whereas the completion of this project fulfills a 21-year dream to provide Longmont with a reliable, affordable, high-quality, and high-speed fiber optic internet service, and whereas this network future-proofs Longmont, creating a long-term engine for economic growth, community vitality, and educational advancement, and whereas NextLight broadband unmatched combination of speed and price has betterment of residents and businesses drawn attention from around the country, and even across the world, and gained Longmont recognition by PC Magazine as the fastest city in the U.S. I love being the fastest city in the U.S. Now, therefore, I, Dennis L. Coombs, Mayor, by the virtue of the authority vested in me and the City Council of the City of Longmont, do hereby proclaim Longmont to be Colorado's first gig city, and I invite all citizens and businesses to celebrate this landmark community achievement. Truly the best internet in the country belongs in Longmont. Thank you for everybody, and thanks for council. I think we should have the, do you want to say anything first before the pictures? Okay, we'll do the pictures.
He's like, I want my picture. I want my picture.
Get up there. Yeah, why don't you? I'll come up.
What? There's a lot of people. All right, man wants
This
to
is a
solo.
big thing, you know, this was council, was a team effort. Yeah, you can talk.
You can be able to get us all in? Can you do a scan job? Well, if you step out, we'll have to. Actually, do you want to move inside here? I'll come next to that. Yeah, sure. That's easier.
Shepherds. Shepherds.
Okay, on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Back up. Three, 1, 2, 3. Great, thank you. All right, thank you. Thanks for your support, sir.
See you next Friday.
You know, you can take the mic and say a few good words about your team and let us know if you're tired of winning all the time.
Well, Mayor Cobens and members of council, I'm Tom Reniotis, General Manager of Longmont Power and Communication. I really want to thank you for that proclamation. You know, it's been a really long time to get to where we are today with the completion of the Next Light broadband network. I had a lot more hair when we started this back in the late 90s. And, you know, it's really pretty amazing to think that our city actually had established this vision back in the mid-90s to build a network like this, and we had quite a few hurdles to overcome to make it a reality today. We plan on being complete with the bulk of the city-wide network construction within the next few weeks. Of course, we're going to continue to hook up new customers as they subscribe to NextLight, and we'll also continue to expand the network as the city grows. But I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank City Council, each of you, as well as those who sat in those chairs years ago, that provided the tremendous support that if we didn't have, we know that today we wouldn't be having the celebration we're having today. So I really want to thank you for that. And, you know, you saw my staff up here because, you know, providing this type of a service to our community and being able to experience the success of NextLight is certainly very rewarding. But it also represented a heck of a lot more work and a lot more stress for many people throughout the city organization that contributed to the success, but especially LPC staff. And so I really want to take the time today to acknowledge and thank them for a hard job well done. Thank you.
Okay, now it's time for first call public invited to be heard. I'm going to remind each speaker you only have 3 minutes to speak, so please limit your comments to 3 minutes. First up is Mike Chamberlain. Please come down and state your name and address.
Mike Chamberlain, 518 East 16th Avenue, Longmont, Colorado. Email is mikechamberlain with an N at comcast.net. Mayor, council members, I'd like to apologize to the public for exceeding my time limit last meeting and let my frustration get the best of me. For that, I'm sorry. Next, with all due respect, I would ask for you to consider my inexperience here and try to look past the way I present this case and instead to focus on the facts. And please try to put yourself in our shoes while going through the information and finally confront this issue once and for all. And now about our agreement with the Mayor of Longmont. HG.org states that verbal agreements are contracts even though they were not memorialized in writing. So does the information I presented to you demonstrate the following? A verbal agreement on August 25th, 2006 with the mayor. From the minutes of that meeting, bullet points number 10 through 12, which I have attached to your thing there. Number 2, an offer made by one party and accepted by another. Same meeting, same bullet points. Agreement made between the mayor of Longmont, myself, and the citizens of Longmont who signed our petition. Number 3, proposed an arrangement, and one party proposed an arrangement, and the other party accepted it. Same meeting, same bullet points between myself and the citizens of Longmont I was representing and the mayor. Number 4, evidence of performing the services called for under the contract. City management's own words through email correspondence and the work performed on the Greenway following thereafter, and not limited to just those documents, but also any others in the city management's possession. Was anyone else present when the contract was made? Allison Canepa, Dick Anderson, representing the Sundial subdivision, and the Director of Community Development, Phil Delvecchio. Written communications between the parties involved, my correspondence with management and the Director of Community Development after the agreement was reached. And now I would like to request that all documents in this matter be preserved and made public at once, and an independent investigation and whistleblower protection for all who come forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was that better?
Yes. Robert Carlson.
Hi, Mayor Coombs, Council. I'm Robert Carlson. I live at 501 Emory Street in Longmont. As a resident of the historic East Side neighborhood, I'm pleased that the council is supporting, I hope, a temporary moratorium on the development in the downtown, creative and historic and adjacent historic east and west side districts. As commercial and residential, especially historic neighborhoods are abut, detailed design guidelines addressing the scale, bulk, size, height to minimize impacts on the adjacent properties is essential. Failure to do this will begin to erode the historic characteristics of the entire neighborhood. So I encourage you to support the moratorium as it comes into view. Thank you, sir.
Paula Fitzgerald.
Mayor, Council, my name is Paula Fitzgerald, and I live at 419 Emory Street. I'm here tonight as a concerned neighbor to the Kimbark Street application my husband that we've mentioned several times. I support fairness, and I'm a believer in the integrity of public process, fairness to the Longmont area realtors, and fairness to the adjacent neighbors. And fairness to you, that you've spent many hours crafting the comprehensive plan, and now we're just waiting for the that vision to be unfolded in the details. It's important for everybody to know what's expected of them and what they will someday live next to. As you know, and has been famously said, the devil's in the details. So jiving the comprehensive plan with that development code is critical for realizing the full vision of what everyone, including yourselves, is attempting to put together. As you know, the new comprehensive plan is out of sync with the development chapter of the municipal code. It's a two-part process. First the vision, then the particulars. It would be next to impossible to fairly evaluate the proposal, any proposal, on the sweeping vision of the comprehensive plan alone. Specifics will be provided in the code. Couple of the vision statements that I've mentioned before that are found in the comp plan and need updating in the development code are maintaining and enhancing the character of established neighborhoods, ensuring development or redevelopment is designed to be sensitive to and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood context, providing transitions in height, scale, mass, and intensity, and that development abutting lower density and intensity established residential neighborhoods should provide transitions in massing and heights. Before any permanent structures are built, we feel it's critical that the code update be allowed to move forward to align with these vision statements. I believe that residents, Longmont Area Association of Realtors, and other developers all require clarity in these vision statements to be achieved. It's my understanding that the code update is expected to be completed by the end of the year. A short moratorium is a small hardship for any pending application. If not put on temporary hold, the Kimbark proposed development is very likely to become the new de facto standard referenced by other redevelopments. A moratorium is a simple tool available to council to use in just this kind of situation. Please ensure that our vision of Longmont is allowed to be fulfilled. Take the time to do it right. It's something that will last beyond any of our days and should be done with the long-term benefit of Longmont in mind. And I thank you for your consideration and asking for more information to come forward soon. And I would also like to ask that people in the audience stand who are here to support a moratorium, just so you can get a visual on the support that we have. Thank you.
All right. Patrick Fitzgerald.
My name is Patrick Fitzgerald, or Rick Fitzgerald. I live at 419 Emory Street, and it's very gratifying to see that you guys in council have brought yourself up to speed on these historic neighborhoods' plights. It's very gratifying to see government working on our behalf. So many of my remarks may be not needed, but I'm going to read them anyway, so I got my 3 minutes. My wife, Paul, and I have given you a letter requesting your vote for a moratorium on development or redevelopment projects within the future transition zone areas of historic Old Town Longmont. We've been speaking to you about a proposed new office building at 420 and 422 Kimbark Street. As you know, this project plans to scrape two 50-foot long, 11-foot and 14-foot high one-story buildings and replace them with a 100-foot long, 53-foot high office and retail building. The architect notes that the building height is 43 feet, but the two large structures on the roof are massive enough that they should be considered part of the overall building height, not just a rooftop unit like an air conditioner. We've handed out to you our recently completed survey of each building on Main Street between 3rd and 6th Street. You'll notice that survey that there are only 3 buildings that exceed 43 feet. And again, these are on our central Main Street, the heart of our urbanized area. Main Street is where the tallest buildings, tallest structures should be located. To have a proposed building taller than all but 3 of these and on a street that will likely be earmarked as a transition zone is not appropriate, in our opinion. Main Street buildings range in height from 17 feet to 48 feet with an average height of 25 foot 6 inches. Buildings in the historic downtown predominantly have a 50-foot frontage on Main Street, which is half the width of the proposed Kimbark building. The proposed building height and mass will dwarf the nearby buildings and is not compatible. A transition zone has been discussed for years. We understand that this will be discussed with the upcoming development code. The transition zone would likely step down the building heights to blend more suitably with the historic districts and require architecturally suitable detailing. We ask that the code update be allowed to be completed prior to any proposal being approved. It seems backwards to have this important discussion follow a project approval of this scale. A building should last for decades or even 100 years or more. Should we hasten an approval through the review process when a code update on this very subject is so imminent and when the impacts are so lasting? I don't think so. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, no clapping, please. Stephanie Uhas.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs and City Council members. As a 20-year resident, I haven't actually come to address the council for several years. I think that I've built up some of my feelings about what I see going on in the city, and it made me feel like I needed to come here tonight. Ironically, some of the issues that I came here to discuss are already coming up, which I think is great. Since I live in the historic district, I forgot to say that right, I'm Stephanie Uhas, I live at 712 Collier. So I think that I'm observing a lot of changes, not just in our neighborhood, but in the entire town, that are actually changing the character of the town the way I see it, and our quality of life, some property value differences. I see a lot of congestion. And so one of the things that I, besides opposing the types of development that we're talking about in historic East Side and West Side, I also really think you need to reconsider the parking. This idea of diagonal and back-in parking, as a person who's worked in Boulder for many years and see what's happened there, they've attempted it. It hasn't really worked. It's not really ideal. I don't think you really want to copy Boulder. Is that really who you want to be? So I think actually it would be better to maintain the width of the streets, allow for the bike lanes, allow for the neighborhood to advance the way that it has been, get people to walk. There's plenty of spaces that are vacant and not filled during the day, so I think that you really need to consider why you want to do that. I also wanted to bring up water rates, because I've noticed that, and I didn't come at the time when that was coming up, but frankly, those of us who've been here a long time are about to see our water rates double. And I really want to understand why you feel that it's so important to purchase Windy Gap shares and what that's actually going to do for us in the short term. It sounds like you're thinking about this as a long-term project, which I can understand at some level, but it sounds to me like it's also hedging for a business deal that you might be considering who you might be able to sell it to in the future. And I'm not so sure that you should be doing that on the backs of the residents. So I really would like to have you reconsider that whole Windy Gap project if it hasn't already gone through. And that actually brings up, speaking of water, I have a family member who has a hangar at the airport, and so I understand also there's been a whole water issue at the airport where people have been forced to purchase meters and do all of these things that's costing them a lot of money. And there's a redevelopment that's happening across Airport Road on the eastern side that actually could obstruct the flight path. So I also want to bring up that objection. So is that the end of my 3 minutes?
Yep.
Okay, I'll come
Thank
back
you.
another time. Thanks.
Wendy Groenbeck.
My name's Wendy Gronbeck. I live at 210 4th Avenue, and I'm not here about the railroad, even though I can spin on it from my front porch. I really, really do appreciate your bringing up slowing down and looking at what's happening with the Realtors Association building. That's very encouraging coming here. When I walked here, I stopped at the corner of 4th and Kimbark and turned around and looked at that area and imagined that building there. And what it did was erase the town. If you look at it, the town will not be visible beyond that. So it's worth taking a peek on your way out of here. I really want you to look at this building very carefully. I graded it like a teacher. I give it 4 Ds. Disrespect for the essence of Old Town. for nearby homes, for the beautiful church right next to it, and even for the historic buildings on Main Street, which are doing a better job of honoring our history than that building will be. I give it a D for disregard for the neighbors' wishes. I give it a D for desecration of the area. It's hard, it's tall, it's flat, it's blocky, it's a sunlight killer, and it's unrelated in style and material to anything around it. I give it a D for being deleterious to the people that live there. Councilman Finley, you mentioned some people that a moratorium would be unfair to. There was one group that wasn't in that list, and that's our homeowners. That is deleterious to those of us who have invested in this neighborhood. I bought a home 50 feet from the railroad, but I wouldn't buy one anywhere near that building because it would make my home nearly worthless, I should think, when I go to sell it. People in our area are rescuing little rat traps of shacks and remodeling them and putting their heart and soul into making them fit in this neighborhood. And then their home is going to be devalued by being next to a monstrosity like this. I urge the Realtors Association to reconsider this building or relocate it to someplace more appropriate. And I urge the council to encourage them to do so. I know realtors are not profiteers. They're people who care about our community, but their association needs to do the same thing.
Hey, John Martin.
Mayor Coombs and council members, I'm John Martin. I'm at 1671 Radcliffe Place here in Longmont. I'm a 25-year resident of the town and a 12-year business owner in town as well. I'm a contributor through my property taxes and my sales taxes. I also collect a substantial amount of sales taxes through my store that goes into the city coffers. I speak for many of my friends, colleagues, co-workers. My issue is Longmont's starting to look like a third world country with all the transients and the panhandling that we're allowing to go on in this town. It's really becoming an eyesore, and it's a detriment to business. And when I say panhandlers and transients, do not label this as homeless people. All right? I'm compassionate towards truly homeless people. If someone is in need and homeless, we've got systems, the Hour Center, in between, Department of Human Services, get them in the system and get them the help they want. What I'm talking about are the transients and the panhandlers who are here who've made a lifestyle choice. This is what I want to do. I'm going to go out and make $50 to $100 a day, keep me supplied in whatever I need to keep me supplied in, and I'm going to camp in a beat-up old RV or a van in some business lot that happens to be abandoned, such as Kmart, the old Walmart, which is near my store, Penny's. We're seeing these camp lots pop up all over the place. Many of these are unlicensed vehicles. Many of them are from out of state. They trash a parking lot and they make customers and passerbyers very uncomfortable. They impact my business, and hence they impact my sales tax collections for your city, my city. They contribute very little to the community and create a cost to the community. They pay no taxes. Many are petty criminals, if you believe what the Larimer County Sheriff recently said, and he's dealing right now with a rape and a murder from one of these transients or travelers, as they call them in Denver. I don't want that to happen here in Longmont. Our store has had 2 break-ins and a 3rd attempted break-in in the last year. I don't think it's a coincidence, given what we're seeing out in our parking lots, and I think it's not coincidental. It might have something to do with legal weed here, by the way. These people enjoy the beauty and the weather. They focus on high-density retail areas because that's where the people are to pawn off of. It's also the best place to find free camping spots. The police and the code enforcement personnel are very frustrated by this problem and the lack of laws to back them up and help us get them out of here. If this problem was occurring in front of your restaurant or your law firm or your community, your neighborhood, would you do something to change the code? My guess is yes. We need to look at the law, and let's face it. The ACLU wants to use the First Amendment to stop this and to allow this to go on. This is solicitation.
Once the
not
red light
First
comes on,
Amendment.
your 3 minutes is up. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, please stand up for the majority of the citizens with stronger codes. Stop pandering to the travelers, and don't back down to the ACLU when they use the First Amendment to justify solicitation.
Paul Hildebrand.
Paul Hildebrand, 1400 First Avenue. Honorable Mayor, honorable council members, fellow citizens of Longmont. I'm also talking about Ordinance O 2017-47, which makes it a crime to sit or recline in certain public places. And I read it today, and I'll read part of it here. The council does not intend to criminalize homelessness, target the homeless community, or otherwise criminalize an individual's status rather than conduct. The council directs that this be applied equally to all people. It kind of reminds me of a quote that Anatole France said. He kind of put it a little bit more eloquently. Une majestueuse égalité des lois qui interdit aux riches comme aux pauvres de coucher sous les ponts, de manger de l'heureux, et de voler du pain. In other words, it is majestic equality. The law forbids rich and poor alike to sleep under bridges, beg in the streets, and steal loaves of bread. The Apostle Paul might comment, if the law was sufficient, Jesus' life would have been in vain. I'm wondering if I'm the only citizen in Longmont who feels this way. Is there anyone else? You too, you can join in. You're citizens of Longmont if you feel that way. I mean, I'm not going to hold you accountable. I'm just wondering if you're not embarrassed by this law a little bit, or this proposed ordinance. All right, thank you. And I apologize, I've got a date, so I'm going to have to run. It was nice to see you again.
Thank you. Dido Clark.
Hi, Dr. Dido Clark, 534 Baker Street, Longmont. I'm the chair of the Historic East Side, and I came and talked last week about 420 Kimbark, a Longmont Realtors Association building. And today I wanted to talk about how it does not, even with the current revisions to this plan, it does not comply with current zoning code. So I'm going to read out a bit of code here. I'm looking at section 15.03.040. It's commercial zoning districts. And I have a section here called B1CA, and I'm just going to read this out. When commercial uses are located in close proximity to existing residential development or residential zone district, this district should be compatible in terms of scale and bulk and should minimize potential adverse impacts on adjacent residential uses. Should be compatible in terms of scale and bulk and should minimize potential adverse impacts on adjacent residential uses. I think that's as clear as can be to me. There are many other sections in this code where it clearly doesn't comply with current zoning. Another section, 15.03.040A4, quote, to minimize the impact of commercial development on abutting residential districts and uses. And it clearly doesn't do that because of its massive scale, insensitivity and style. And right there, I think we should just have this thing. I don't think it meets code, let's put it that way. The other thing I wanted to say was, it was briefly mentioned, but the Historic Preservation Commission concluded at its last meeting, last Thursday, that there should be a moratorium on this building proposal. So that's for your information as well. And just to reiterate that I've had at least 50 emails, phone calls, my phone has been jammed about this, diagonal parking and this proposal, so I just want you to know about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob McLaughlin?
Good evening, Mayor Coombs and members of council. My name is Bob McLaughlin. I've lived at 620 Emery Street since 1979. I bought one of those rat trap shacks and then spent years and years trying to turn it into a real house, so I understand how that process works. I just want to clarify a couple of things. There are two elements to the transition process. One element is ensuring that development within our neighborhood, within the historic East Side neighborhood, is compatible with the existing structures. In other words, someone doesn't scrape off houses and put up something that's modern and is just totally not in keeping with the neighborhood. The second part is the second transition area is really between the intensity of downtown and the neighborhood. So when you consider this in a couple of weeks when it comes back, there are really two separate elements that the neighborhood cares very much about and that we would like to work with you on to come to a solution. There is no question that the proposal at 420 Kimbark does not support the intent of the current zoning code, let alone what's happening in the future. So I think that you have the authority and the obligation to pause major development projects in areas that are abutting the historic East Side until the zoning code is complete. We have a historic a district listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The downtown has gone to considerable effort to develop their historic district, which is pending, and this, what I would call artless building, is imposed between those two districts and not contributing to either one. So I appreciate your consideration, and we look forward to working with the city on this process. Thank you.
Sharon O'Leary.
Good evening, Mayor Coombs and council members. Thank you for your service. I mean that with full sincerity. I know you dedicate a lot of time to the city of Longmont. Envision Longmont. Darn, that's what we've been doing as a city for over a year. We have taken a lot of public input. We've used a lot of staff's time, and we've spent a lot of our taxpayer dollars just to develop a vision. As a city, we're so close to the finish line that I think it's important that we pause and just wait a little bit longer by putting a temporary moratorium on all new and infill buildings so that future citizens can be beholden to our past decisions. I remember when a past city council was debating the idea of our new Target store, and they didn't want that Target store to have a big box look. And there was a long discussion that evening on softening and taking away that big box look. And we did as a city. And we have timbers and rocks, and it just gives that whole building a softer look, and it fits in, and it had a vision as compared to other Targets as you go around the state. And I'm thankful for that past council's discussion on that. Well, our Longmont area realtors are applying to build a 3-story big box building to replace 2 one-story 1963 buildings. My concern is that this new building presently will maximize impacts to the abutting residential neighborhood. This building's size and mass is not compatible with the character of the area in which they're located, and that includes the downtown area. This building certainly is not a poster building for the realtor industry. It sits in a creative and historic district, and this new building lacks both. This building should be a shining example about all that's right with Longmont. Through the implementation of thoughtful planning, this building will stand for generations to come, and I don't want our future generations looking at buildings and wondering, why the heck didn't the city of Longmont do better? Let's make sure that future generations look at our downtown, which is 3 blocks, abutting up to 2 historical districts, and they're thankful for the decisions past council made. Thank you again for your time.
Strider Benston.
Greetings, Mayor Coombs and Council. I'm Strider Benston, 951 West 17th. Little front-loading diversion. Russia, drip, drip, drip. There are questions of treason in appealing to a foreign power to disrupt a democratic election in this country. But our president said, hey, it wasn't me, it was the kids, get them. He has always thrown everyone near him under the bus, including the whole world, the G20, the Paris Climate Agreement, etc. Be aware there might be a 9/11 coming. As far as local, there seems to be a tempest in a local teapot, but there are many factors involved. Some of you are old enough to know that I used to have a seat up there. And what it was the Longmont Election Commission. And what that was about was a whole lot of outside money coming from developers, especially Western tradition partners out of state, to influence our local election. Well, the first thing that happened with that new administration was the Election Commission was abolished. So we couldn't find out how much it was or whether it was illegal or making any decisions on that. But the question about developers running the show, most of the time, some good things, some terrible things, but we need to be dealing with what's actually happening here. Now, we have a national administration that's created fanatics about get rid of regulations, get rid of health care, get rid of building codes. Well, what happened in London? More than 100 people were killed at Grenfell Towers because there were no regulations. That couldn't have happened in this country because there's regulations in building codes about what kind of materials you put in. We have to deal with these kinds of things, and I think the moratorium for the comprehensive plan is absolutely crucial. Let's have the whole city be involved and decide what kind of a architectural structure do we want with our downtown. And I remember one of the discussions we had when I was sitting up there was about the Committee for Tall Trees. Tall trees can't happen if you put box buildings in to destroy the entire concept of downtown. Thank you.
Thank you. Rachel Brenna.
Mayor, Council, thank you for having us here and doing what you do for the city. I'm Rachel Brenna. I'm at 516 Collier Street in Longmont. I'm also an East Side resident, and I'm here to thank you for considering a moratorium on development in the historic areas of Longmont. As a younger resident of that area, I can tell you I moved to Longmont because of the historic areas and because of what they offer to myself and my family. And I think that's important enough to speak to you about and talk to you a little bit about buildings that are out of character and disturb what I consider the humanity of our downtown and historic neighborhoods. So please consider that, and I appreciate all of the other neighbors that are here tonight to support the moratorium as well. Thank you.
Okay, that ends public invited to be heard. Why don't we take a 5-minute brief recess?
Doug Stokes and Daniel Peters. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for July 25th. Item 8C.
Can we close the doors or
Ordinance
ask those people to leave?
2017-43, a bill for an ordinance amending chapters 2.97, 10.20, and 13.37 of the Longmont Municipal Code to regulate sitting and lying down in public entryways areas outside certain downtown public facilities. Public hearing and second reading scheduled for July 25th. Item 8D is Resolution 2017-60, supporting the grant application for an INSPIRE grant from the State Board of Great Outdoors Colorado for the INSPIRE initiative, Nurtured by Nature in Longmont. Item 8E is Resolution 2017-61, approving the intergovernmental agreement between the City and Colorado Department of Transportation for grant funding for the 2017 Click It or Ticket campaign. Item 8F is Resolution 2017-62, approving the intergovernmental agreement between the City and Colorado Department of Transportation for grant funding for high-visibility impaired driving enforcement. Item 8G is Resolution 2017-63, approving the intergovernmental agreement between the City and State of Colorado Department of Transportation for a Law Enforcement Assistance Fund grant. Item 8H is Platte River Power Authority support for economic development. And item 8I is a request to allocate council contingency funds to complete oil and gas investigations in the city. Staff would like to pull items C and I for short presentations.
Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I would move the consent agenda minus C and I.
All right, that's been moved in second. Let's vote on the consent agenda minus items C and I. That passes 7-0.
Okay. Your next item is second reading ordinances. First one is Ordinance 2017-36, a bill for an ordinance making additional appropriations for the expenses and liabilities of the City of Longmont for the fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2016. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that 2017, shouldn't it be? Okay, 17, sorry. And Teresa is here to make a presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Teresa Malloy, Budget Manager. And we don't normally make a presentation when our appropriations are on second reading because they have become pretty routine for us. However, this one is quite large, as I'm sure you have noticed, and so I wanted to take a brief moment of your time to kind of go through that with you. So the appropriation does total $97.7 million. And it involves 38 different funds throughout the city. It is our carryover appropriations. So the bulk of these dollars are funds that were appropriated in 2016 and are now being carried over into 2017 for projects that were either started or not started in 2016, but not completed in 2016. And so those funds are needed this year to complete these projects. So the carryover portion of it in totals $96.7 million. So almost all of it is carryover. A little under $1 million of this, though, is new dollars, new appropriation of dollars that you have not prior seen in any prior appropriation. And what we did in the council communication is identify those new dollars first, followed by the carryover. I also wanted to remind City Council that the reason we have to carry these funds over from year to year is because by city charter, all of our appropriations in all funds but one, our public improvement fund, legally lapse at the end of the year, and then council has to reappropriate those funds. So that is my brief comments on this. We do have staff here that can answer specific questions should you have them.
Does anybody have any questions before we open up the public hearing? Councilmember Christensen.
This isn't really a question. This is just a little tiny picky thing on page 148 under the golf fund. The last one, I think you want to change to golf instead of gold, unless we own property in gold, that would be good.
Unfortunately, we don't, yes. Thank you for that. That is the Gulf Fund.
Good eye. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing on ordinance 2017-36. Is anybody from the public who'd like to speak at this time? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing on ordinance 2017-36. Councilmember Christensen. Oh, Councilmember Santos.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I move ordinance 2016-36 with the correction.
All right, it's been moved with gold changed to golf, and it's been seconded. Let's vote. And that passes 7-0.
Mayor Coombs, your next item is are the South Main Station right-of-way vacations. You have 3 ordinances. I'll read all of them, and then you could open one public hearing for all 3, but we do need separate motions.
Okay.
Ordinance 2017-37, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of a portion of the 2nd Avenue right-of-way located between Kimbark Street and Emery Street. Ordinance 2017-38, a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of a portion of the 2nd Avenue right-of-way between Main Street and Kimbark Street, generally located within the southeast quarter of Section 3, Township 2 North, Range 69 west of the 6th Principal Meridian, City of Longmont. Ordinance 2017-39 is a bill for an ordinance conditionally approving the vacation of a portion of the Emery Street right-of-way located between 2nd Avenue and 1st Avenue. And we don't have a formal staff presentation, but Don Burchett is here if you have any questions.
Okay, is there any questions for Don before I open up the public hearing? Okay, I'm going to have the public hearing on all 3 ordinances, ordinance 2017-37, 38, and 39. Is there anybody from the public who'd like to speak on any of these 3 ordinances? Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing on ordinance 37, 38, and 39. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I would move 2017-37.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, but there's 3 options on that, and it should be, are you moving option 2, the recommended option?
Recommended option.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, let's vote. That passes 7-0. Okay, we got to move the other 2. Councilmember Christensen?
I'll move 2017-38.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Let's vote. That passes 7-0. Councilmember Peck?
I move ordinance 2017-39.
Second.
All right, that's been moved and seconded. Let's vote. And that passes 7-0.
Mayor Coombs, your next item is ordinance 2017-40, a bill for an ordinance amending Title IX, Chapter 9.40 of the Longmont Municipal Code on smoking in public places. And I believe Eugene has a few words before you begin.
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. When we started working on this ordinance, we were looking at a specific issue of smoking around public facilities and the public health impacts surrounding that behavior. And so this ordinance was targeted at that behavior. Here I think the public process helped. After first reading, Boulder County Health took a look at our ordinance and encouraged us to update the existing ordinance to come into alignment with state law, the new Clean Indoor Air Act. And so given that feedback and very helpful suggestions, which we intend to incorporate, I would suggest that council hold the public hearing since we have it announced, At the end of that, continue this matter to the 25th. The changes that we'll be making will be deleting some antiquated provisions from our existing code regarding smoking indoors in private clubs and for employees within the city. And so that is why we're asking council to continue this matter to the 25th. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, well, should I go ahead and hold the public hearing on that? We actually have someone, Ellis Selton, let's see, Selton Fuss?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor Coombs and City Council. My name is Alice Seltenfuss, and I live at 1913 Tyler Avenue here in Longmont for over 30 years. I work for Hope Homeless Outreach, providing encouragement. I would like to speak to item 8C of the first reading ordinance regulating sitting and lying down in public places, and item 9C ordinance of the second reading of Longmont Municipal Code on smoking in public places. I understand that people sitting or lying on the walkways to city buildings could possibly be a problem, and that smoking is a health risk and has caused patrons at such locations as the Longmont Library, and I support the smoking ban. These ordinances, though, were developed because of individuals who have no homes to do these above behaviors. Otherwise, why would the first ordinance further state the council does not intend this section to criminalize homelessness? But it's because of these very individuals that these ordinances were written. Some individuals without a sanctioned place to be, who have limited resources, let's say Social Security disability of $744 a month, will get ticketed. Some will go to jail and have an even higher fee than the $25 original ticket. Then homelessness is criminalized. We have seen it with the standards of behavior already, an ordinance that was enacted because of individuals who do not have a sanctioned place to be. For me, my sanctioned place is my home. Instead of dealing with the issues as a community, we're putting the responsibility for enforcing the standards of behavior, the sidewalk restriction, the smoking ban, the median restriction, all on the Longmont Police Department. I'm not sure why the sidewalk restriction has to be revised again, as it is listed in the standards of behavior for outdoor properties owned by the city of Longmont, and I quote, "Any obstruction of a sidewalk that actually prevents a person from passing or makes such passage unreasonably inconvenient or hazardous." But lastly, let's continue to be a community that works towards affordable housing for all. Let's work towards a mental health crisis center of our own, not 20 miles away. And maybe we can find a sanctioned place for people to be who call Longmont their home. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. So does someone want to make a motion to, excuse me, is there anybody else from the public who'd like to speak on this? All right, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Councilmember Bagley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I move that we set over ordinance 2017-40 as, say again, Mr. May?
July 25th.
Oh, yeah, for July 25th, as presented by Eugene May.
Second.
All right, let's vote on that. That passes 7-0. So it's 8C.
This, which is the ordinance regulating sitting and lying down in public entryway areas outside certain downtown public facilities. Sean Lewis will talk about this one.
So, Mayor, Council, I asked to pull this item. We've had several questions regarding the item, where it actually, what it means in terms of locations, and Sean's going to go over that. We also have other staff members that are here to provide additional information and answer questions from council. Sean?
Mayor and Council, Sean Lewis, Assistant City Manager. I really just want to go over the very limited scope of this particular policy. As you'll see on your screen, and these are reflected in your packet, we've given you 3 exhibits that identify exactly where the no sitting or lying would be taking place. So as you can see in the first exhibit, which is the Civic Center and Library campus, you can see that there is really one major area that's designated for sitting and lying. Actually, just off screen is a second area that's between Kimbark Street and the front door to the Civic Center. But you can see the larger of the 2 areas there in between Kimbark and the entrance to both the Civic Center and the library, shown in green. Those are areas where sitting or lying would not be allowed. And again, as you can hopefully tell, that's just the area that's most heavily trafficked by the public. And so you might notice that there's a planter in the center of that area. That is not part of the no sitting or lying, because obviously that planter, if you're familiar with it, was designed to be used as a bench or a sitting area. So we would not be prohibiting sitting or lying down even on that particular area, because that was its intended purpose. But as well as all of the other sidewalks, lawn areas, in fact, no lawn areas are included in this, where we would not be limiting or prohibiting lying down or sitting in those lawn areas. None of the other sidewalks or even the patio that goes around in front of the community rooms in the library, those are also not included in the area. So it's just a very limited scope on this particular campus on which we would be codifying the fact that we don't want people sitting or lying, because that has been identified by facilities as an obstruction and a complaint that we've received from citizens. Harold, if you can go to the next slide. So the second one is the senior center, and again, these are the 2 main public entrances, as well as one staff entrance, but also public exit out of the senior center. Again, you can see it's just those areas that lead directly up to the building. There's also one on the back side. The Roosevelt Park entrance to the senior center, rather, is also pretty heavily used, and so they wanted to designate that as an area. But you can see large lawn spaces all around the facility. Of course, it's next to Roosevelt Park. None of those would be designated as no sitting or lying areas. And then the last one, again, is just the memorial building. Again, very limited area, not all of the sidewalks or kind of concrete paved areas around the building, only those areas that are within approximately 25 feet of the entrance to these facilities would be included in this area. So we feel like that these guidelines, in conjunction with some of the other efforts that you're seeing, such as the standards of behavior that have been adopted, will really help us to just make our facilities more safe. In fact, our staff task force working on this is called the Safe and Welcoming Public Spaces Committee, and they have looked at this very extensively just to make sure that we do not have citizens who continue to complain about this issue. I would like to ask Karen Roney to come forward and talk about some of the examples. The facilities that are most problematic as far as this issue are all within the Community Services Department. So Karen will come and just give you some sense of what we've been dealing with in terms of complaints from citizens as well as our own staff.
Thank you, Sean. Karen Roney, Community Services Director. So really, I would be glad to answer any questions, but primarily, I think what Sean is indicating is that, so particularly where we have scenarios where we have folks that are congregating outside of the west entrance to the library, that sometimes it's very difficult for people to get into the entrance. Sometimes they're walking over people. And so, and we have the same kind of situation that oftentimes happens at the Memorial Building, where we might have some folks, during the wintertime, lying inside that, the entrance where the heater is, and sleeping there, and so that people are coming in to take their kids to preschool, aren't able to get in that door without walking over someone. So I think So what we really try to do, is, as Sean mentioned, is to look at how do we make sure that those main entryways into these particular facilities are free and clear, and that there are also many other places around those public facilities where people can absolutely lie and sit and enjoy those public spaces too. So trying to balance how we make our facilities welcoming to everyone, and so that it is a safe passage through and not obstructed.
Any question, Councilmember Peck?
Thank you, Mayor. Sean, how does this code differ from what we already have on the books?
Mayor Coombs, Councilmember Peck, that's a great question. In the standards of behavior that were referenced in the public hearing, those are not codified, so there really isn't a recourse that the city has if someone refuses to comply with keeping these areas unobstructed. So while those are guidelines for staff to go out and say, I'm sorry, we do have a standard of behavior that says you can't lie here, we have no teeth, if you will, to actually make that, to relocate that person. So this will simply make sure that people understand that there are consequences for refusing to keep these areas free and clear where people can get in and out of the entrances.
Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. You mentioned complaints. How many? How often? Quantified for us so we know how big a problem it really is.
Mayor and Councilmember Moore, Carinoni. So can I give you an exact, is it 34 or, I cannot do that at this time.
Daily, weekly, hourly?
I would say it
17
goes.
times a minute?
I would say that it is, it's seasonal. So I think so we've heard more complaints, I think particularly at the Memorial Building during the winter months where people are trying to stay warm, and so they know when the building is open, and that they can go inside. And again, sometimes folks are just are not responsive when we ask them to leave. So several times at the Memorial Building, in the library, it's probably more constant. And the complaints that we get are from patrons who are saying, it doesn't feel like it's welcoming for me if I have to step over someone to bring my kid to story time or to bring my child to the preschool. That it just doesn't feel like it's a safe place for me to bring my my child or to come in and enjoy the recreation facilities if I'm having to walk over people who are sleeping or maybe passed out. So I don't have an exact number, but it is consistent enough where we have people say, I'm not coming back to the Memorial Building, I'm not and spending my money there, or I'm not coming back to the library because it doesn't feel like a place that is welcoming for me and my children to enjoy the experience.
How is that different from someone standing in that entryway of the Memorial Building? I mean, that's not sitting and that's not lying.
So I think for standing, certainly you can move around. So this is really about more someone that would be obstructing, obstructing my passageway.
Okay, so if they're standing there, you would not kick them out?
It's sitting or lying so that you can't move forward.
Okay. Do we have, it's a question for Eugene. Do we have like a 95% confidence interval that we won't be sued for this particular ordinance? I mean, it doesn't make sense to pass something that we're immediately going to get sued for.
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. As any attorney will tell you, they can't give you a confidence interval on being sued. People do all sorts of crazy things, including. Right. Is this ordinance carefully crafted in light of the existing case law? Yes. Do I believe it's defensible? Yes. Will somebody actually file a suit? I have no idea.
All right. So something just doesn't seem to smell good about this. I mean, I've heard from people that said, I know it's very specific to certain areas, and having, I mean, where are they supposed to go? I mean, that's really the question of things. It's not rhetorical.
So I think part of it is, and I think part of what I heard is there's an interpretation that you can't sit and lie anywhere on these properties, and that's not the case. So if you look at this diagram, the grass area immediately adjacent to the sidewalk, you can sit and lie there. Basically anywhere outside of the green boundary, you can sit and lie in those locations. It's really focusing on the entryway and where residents and customers of our facility go in and out of the locations. When you look at this location, as Sean indicated, even the dark green in the middle in that area, you can sit or lie there. Benches you consider lie there. The grass areas you consider lie. So this is not saying you cannot do it at our facilities. What it's saying is you cannot do it in these walkways that go into the facilities, and I think that's the distinction in this.
Okay, are there examples of other ordinances that other cities have put in place that would be unchallenged or less likely to be challenged?
Mayor and Council, there is an ordinance in Seattle that was upheld in district court and in, I believe it was Tempe, Arizona.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Bagley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I think all the ordinance is doing is I don't think it's necessarily saying that if you're a transient or you're homeless, you can't go downtown on public property or lie down or sit down. It's just saying don't block the entryways to our buildings and prohibit people from enjoying the facilities. They can, there's plenty of space down there. So I move ordinance 2017-43.
Second. All right, it's been moved and seconded. Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Sean, and on the committee, I'm assuming fire is on that committee, someone from the fire department.
Mayor Coombs, Councilmember Santos, the fire division is not specifically represented. We do have 2 representatives from public safety, though.
The only reason I ask is, if people are lying or sitting and obstructing entrances to city facilities that may have an emergency, that's a problem. I would hope people would get up and move, but as Councilmember Bailey said, I see this more as there are plenty of other opportunities for people, whether you're out on your luck or you're potentially there to disrupt the operations of the city in any fashion. So I just don't see it as one, as a member of the public mentioned earlier, one particular group. I see this as an overall arching, this is what we want as far as making sure that we have access to those buildings and the residents, and that everyone has access to the buildings without having to trip and walk over people when it's not an appropriate area. If you want to lay down and sit, there are other facilities, or chairs or benches, things of that nature. So.
Mayor Coombs, Councilmember Santos, that's correct. And I should have mentioned at both Memorial and at the Senior Center, those facilities both have benches located within the area that's identified. Again, because that particular facility was designed for sitting, you are allowed, anyone can sit there as long as they want in those benches, chairs that have been placed there for sitting, even though they're within the designated area. If it is designed for sitting, then certainly we would not prohibit that. I'd also point out at the Memorial Building that where the most congregation occurs at that facility is on the east side where the bus stop is. And so there are people throughout the day that are congregated there. We are not addressing that. That has not been a major problem. Some of the smoking and close to the entrances have been for staff, and we've gotten some complaints from citizens about that as well. But the actual congregating in that area, because it's frankly designated or designed, if you will, for congregation. So these ordinances don't apply to those. There is not an entrance to the facility, and that's where we have the most congregation.
And it's the most heavily used entrances is what I'm seeing. Thank you.
Councilmember Peck?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I understand the genesis of this ordinance, and as Harold has explained, I can see this at the senior center, where people feel, especially older people like me, who are feeble, who feel that they're feeble to walk through a gauntlet of people who were just there for a very long time with no specific purpose to be there. However, the people that Karen Roney described are homeless. Those are the people that are trying to get warm by the heaters, etc. So even though this isn't a bad ordinance from my perspective, we have not addressed the problem of homelessness in this city, and that bothers me a lot, with people camping on the St. Vrain corridor, of bringing Mike Butler, Chief Butler's program that he has written to all of us about the work program, where some of these people have to actually work and contribute to our community. And I don't want us seeing us nitpicking all kind of different ordinances around the city when we're not really addressing the base problem. And I would like the council and staff to address that. And I know that Karen has an incredible program that she's going to explain to us, but it does not reach down to the root problem. And so I don't have any problem with this ordinance. I understand what it's doing, but I don't think it's going to get to the heart of what we're doing or not doing in this city. So I just want us to all realize that and address it before another season goes by. So I'll approve the ordinance because I do understand what you're trying to do. But again, let's just all realize this is not the root of the problem at all.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, and Councilmember Peck, I definitely hear what you're saying, and I think, you know, as we've been evaluating the overall issue, there are many steps that we're working through. Karen is going to talk about one of those steps that's part of it, but I think one of the things that we all realize is that this is going to really, this is something that takes a multi-pronged approach as we continue to move forward. You know, one of the things that I was talking to Karen about earlier is last week I had the opportunity to go visit my mom and aunt and check on them because of issues. And one of the things that was interesting to me as I was making the drive that I've made before, what I really saw in communities of all sizes, but especially smaller communities, is that you're seeing the same thing. And as we talk about this issue, this is, and we talk about it in terms of Longmont, we talk about it in terms of the Front Range, in terms of the state of Colorado, but this is really something now that we're starting to see across the nation. And as I talk to colleagues, they're dealing with the same issue. And so I think our intent is to really take that broader approach and start working on those issues. Karen and I had that conversation today as part of this other piece, and we realize that there's many other steps that we need to continue working on. At the end of the day, some things I wanted to clarify as well, if it's okay with council. When we talked about the rules of behavior, or the, what do we call it? I forgot. Standards of behavior, and we talk about all of these issues. The one thing that has been at the forefront of the conversation is that everyone's welcome in Longmont. What we want is we want folks to work and use facilities as they're intended to be used, respect the other folks that are in those facilities, respect the folks that are trying to get into the facilities. And if we can do that, we have no issue. And in part of that process, there was the comment in the public hearing about we're putting this on the police department to enforce. One of the things that I wanted to remind council, but also remind the community, is that as an organization, we're taking a much broader approach in terms of how we engage in these conversations. So the immediate step from members of our organization is not to necessarily call police. It's really to go out and have a conversation with folks and say, you know, you're more than welcome in this facility, but here's what we expect. And if you're willing to do this, then you're more than welcome to stay here. And when you look through those standards of behavior, there's a process that we go through. We have the campus supervisors that engage with folks and have those conversations and get to know them. And all of that is done before we ever call the police. When you look at that, there are certain situations when we will call the police, and that's when there's immediate safety concerns or issues going on that require their attention. But the basis for what we're trying to do is to engage as an organization and engage as individuals and have conversations with folks to really say, here's what we expect. And, you know, in this case, is if you want to lie down, here's another place where you can lie down. We just need to keep this open for the folks that are coming into our facilities. And I just wanted to sort of, you know, give that 30,000 view of this broader piece. So I appreciate council giving me that opportunity.
Councilmember Christensen.
So I have a question, because to me this is all about obstruction, and I do understand this too. However, so is it possible that we do not have any law on the books about obstructing public buildings, obstructing going in and out of public buildings, that already would cover this?
Mayor and Council, Eugene May again. So there is obstructing highway or other passageway in our code. Yeah. At least from my perspective, this is a lot clearer. In our current existing code, obstruct means to make impassable or make passage unreasonably inconvenient or hazardous.
Right.
Minds will disagree as to what is unreasonably inconvenient or hazardous. This is a bright line in a very small area where the highest traffic areas where this behavior is not allowed. And at least from an enforcement perspective, you know, I think clearer, brighter lines are better. And, you know, if it is a maze of people, does that unreasonably inconvenient or hazardous? You know, you ask 3 people, you probably get 3 different answers. With this ordinance, you ask 3 people, you get the same answer.
But wouldn't it be better just to amend the code to make it more clear instead of creating a new?
Well, the current code applies to highways and other passageways.
Oh, so it's not really about buildings or pathways.
It does include buildings as well as highways.
Okay. Well, okay. The problem I have with this is it really, you're taking public spaces, and the civic center is intended to be a civic center. It's intended to be a public plaza, and I'm very reluctant to start making laws about what people can and can't do about in a public place, because it's about the Constitution. They do. I mean, and it seems peculiar because we're talking about, I've used all these places for 30 years, and I've never seen anybody lying on the concrete. But I just have to trust that everybody else has, and I've never had anybody blocking a door. But once again, the people who work there say this is happening, and so I take your word for it. But people can also sit, in my experience, people sit in the grass. So this doesn't affect those people. And they can also sit on the planters, and they can also lie on the planters. So I just don't want this to become something that, okay, we forbade this, now we'll just, mission creep.
Mayor Coombs, Councilmember Christensen, I do want to point out, since you alluded to constitutional issues, that this does not prohibit in any way the free expression or demonstration of any free speech activity. So if you wanted to have a sit-in, a lie-in on these areas, that this ordinance would not prohibit you from doing that. That is, particularly here at the Civic Center, it's been identified by our attorneys as a public forum space, and so you would certainly still have that right. This ordinance would not prohibit that type of free speech activity. And we have clarified that with the attorneys.
Yeah. Councilmember Peck?
Thank you. A couple of other points of clarification. Eugene, you said that that ordinance was about highways and passageways in buildings. Is not an entryway considered a passageway? Or did I miss it?
It is.
So we do have an ordinance about passageways
Yes.
in buildings.
Yes.
Why can't we just enforce that?
We do, that it's unclear to different people. The standard for obstruct in the existing ordinance is impassable or make passage unreasonably inconvenient or hazardous. I think, somebody with a small child would probably have a different view of what is unreasonably inconvenient or hazardous. Somebody with mobility issues has a different view. I just think this is a lot clearer way in a very limited area in the high traffic zones of city facilities.
So amending that, though, to further explain that.
That is certainly approach. I mean, if council wants to go that direction,
A totally different ordinance.
I'm happy to go that way.
I like your idea, though, that bright lines that are clear and very focused are a lot easier for people to understand and interpret. And you already explained your answer for that already. I've seen people, when I've gone into early morning rec classes at the Roosevelt Center, it's not a hindrance to me because I can just leap over them, but, it is a hindrance. So that's why I think you need these clear, bright lines and narrowly focused. And, I think we've got a motion. It's been second. I think it's time to vote.
But I have a question about the fee. You said there would be a $25 fee imposed if they did not comply. Did I read that correctly? Fine. I'm not a fee or fine.
So a first offense would be subject to our administrative civil penalties provisions of the code, and those are civil. They are not criminal.
Right.
After that, it would be subject to the general penalties of this section of the code.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your answer.
Councilmember Bagley?
I'm ready to vote.
Okay, let's vote. Okay, that passes 6-1 with Councilmember Christensen dissenting. Is there any way we could, when we vote, not put it up until everybody votes? Okay, thank you.
Mayor Coombs, the next item is a request to allocate council contingency funds to complete oil and gas investigations in the city. I believe Harold's going to talk about this one.
Mayor, Council, this is another item that, again, there were some questions on, and we've been talking to Council about this process, and so I really pulled it to give Council the ability to ask any questions. I have Jason here, Nick here, that can help answer any questions that Council has regarding this issue. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is when we began looking at this issue, what we did is we took a conservative approach looking at the potential issues that could arise at these locations. We met with Terracon, and they essentially said, here's what it's going to cost, and they estimated about $16,000 per location in doing this. Obviously, as we indicated in the council comm, it may not be that much in certain locations, but definitely wanted to give council a chance to ask us any questions.
Well, one question that I have is, let's say you've got an HOA that, they knew that there was this plugged-in abandoned well by, the title work, and they were fine with it. They built up this whole HOA area, homes, and they've, been there for 20 years, not a problem. And if they're concerned about it, why isn't the HOA paying for that particular one? I mean, if I have no problem about the safety, but it's like in some cases maybe the citizens of Longmont as a whole shouldn't be paying for, in my mind, every single one of these things. Just my thoughts. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I have similar concern. We don't know if these are all on public land. Is that correct?
Correct. We know that some are on private land, and so obviously all we can do is go in and ask the landowner if we can go in and do this. If the landowner indicates no, you can't go in and do this, then there's nothing we can do. I think what we know is, and Jason, why don't you come up and help me with this conversation? And Eugene's here, as we've all been involved in this. I think what we know is we know approximate locations of the well, but we don't know exactly where it is. And Jason, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Mayor Coombs, City Council, Jason Elkins, Public Works, Natural Resources. So, Mayor Coombs, in your question about the HOAs knowing about these plugged-in abandoned wells, we're not absolutely positive that they did know about them. A lot of these wells were plugged and abandoned back in the 80s, early 90s, before these developers came in, developed these subdivisions. It's probably a safer bet to assume that they don't know that it exists, and this is going to be a surprise to a lot of these HOAs and homeowners.
So is there a possibility that some of these people might not want to do this because, let's say they go in there and they find that there's some low-level problem, then basically all the people's houses around that plug-in abandoned well have now theoretically maybe gone down in value by 30 or 40%. I mean, it could be sometimes, as a homeowner, I would want to know, but maybe some homeowners don't want to know. I don't know.
As a homeowner, I would want to know as well, Mayor.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are actual recorded incidents where a plugged-in abandoned well has ended up leaking and caused damage, has actually exploded home down in Trinidad back in 2007, Bradford, Pennsylvania back in 2011, and there's been several new studies that have showed that plugged-in abandoned wells over time have actually ended up failing and leaking.
Okay. Well, I guess I'd rather err on the side of safety than put anybody at risk. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. Continue. So my concern is using public money on private property. Say that we do this, find that there is no issue. We've actually helped their title work and given them a benefit that no one else has access to, the same benefit if they don't have a well, right? So we basically give them clear title on that well site and not getting any compensation for it. So it's a lot of money. We're talking potentially $96,000. And my thought is that we shouldn't be doing it on private land. I also believe that just for the public's interest, our council contingency says we have $56,000. The one on the web's not correct. Okay. So we can't, okay. Well, but I'm just pointing it out to the public then, that what is on our website, it's not correct.
Yeah,
is that what I heard?
It will be after this recent appropriate.
You had a carryover of the council contingency.
That's what I was trying to get to. I didn't know how much that was. So we have.
On the agenda, I think eyes are bad. Hold on a second.
$116,000.
Yeah, $116,000 total with the carryover.
So I would move we take this forward only on public land.
Okay. I'll second that. That doesn't mean necessarily I'm going to vote that way, but I think it's. Councilmember Peck?
Thank you. I hate to see this issue brought down to money. We're talking about the possibility of people's lives. And Eugene, what is the risk factor here, private or public, if a home does get damaged, or because now we know, since Firestone, now we know the risk factor.
The risk factor for the city?
Yeah, what is the risk factor of the city if we do not examine these wells, regardless of where they are, and one of them does have a leak and a home explodes? Is the city at risk? Because we have the ability to examine them.
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. So going through my head is Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. All evaluations of risk have to be based on specific facts.
Okay.
So I really can't generalize.
Can't answer that. All right.
What the exposure for the city would be.
Okay.
I think part of it, we would have to go back to look at the approval process. And Eugene, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's where you would start, correct? When it went through the planning process and what was in that conversation.
Are we talking about a different thing, though? The Firestone was a producing well that just had an uncapped flow line. And that's different than the plugged-in abandoned well. I'm not saying the plugged-in abandoned wells don't have their risk, too, but it was, we're comparing apples with oranges, I think.
Potentially. I mean, I think if you remember when Dale made the presentation, and Jason, if I missed this, you jump in and stop me, but we do know that there's actually a collection line that does run. If you remember, Dale put up a map that shows a collection line, and when we look at, for example, the well on U Creek Golf Course that the city condemned, that was probably at one point connected into that collection line. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so what's happening in that location, again, that's our property, though.
Right, yeah.
And so that's a different thing. So piece of the puzzle, I think the Mariama location is adjacent to a neighborhood in an undeveloped parcel that may or may not have been on that collection line. Is that correct as well?
That's correct.
And so that's another piece to the puzzle.
Right. Well, I don't think anybody here on council has any problems with us doing everything we can on the city non-private. I guess the question is who pays for it on totally private property.
And that's ultimately council's decision on this. If you want us to do the city only, then you can direct that. If you want us to do all of it, you can direct that. What we did is we brought what we felt was the most conservative approach forward.
Okay. Councilmember Peck?
Oh.
Okay.
No, thank you. Sorry.
Councilmember Bagley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I kind of look at it as I don't think that we're providing a benefit necessarily to private landowners. It's something that nobody knows, nobody's going to check. And I think that it's just, if it's one of this, for $96,000, worst case scenario, just to look at all the plug and abandoned wells, test them, and just say, we're good, we're done. I think that's a good use of funds, especially when it's just going to sit there till the end of the year and we're going to have a line of 20 people asking to use the contingency funds. So we might as well use it now, tie this issue up in a bow, and know that in the future, I'm not going to be walking my dog and my neighbor's house is going to blow up and I happen to be there and I die. So I'm being a little facetious again, but I say we just get it done and do it.
A couple of things I want to point out. One of the things that Jason's working on, and he's found a company that for minimal cost they can monitor into the future.
So Ajax Analytics will do real-time monitoring 24/7, and they will post the actual results of their monitoring up on a website that will be open to the public. And should an event happen, say there's a disturbance and that there is a methane leak and there is a detectable recordable incident, you'll see a spike instantly, and that will trigger further investigation. And so there's the Canadian province of Alberta actually is one of the only few places that actually continues systemic monitoring of plugged-in abandoned wells. A lot of people think that a plugged-in abandoned well, that's the end of the life cycle, it's done, and they forget about it. It is made of concrete and steel. It is corrosive. There is corrosive properties inside that will it will ultimately fail at some point. So
Yeah, we all see, half the driveways in Longmont are cracked, and I mean, concrete does crack after a while. Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Well, I would agree with Councilmember Bagley. I mean, while yes, it may be a large sum of money, but the rest, to have people's minds at ease is probably the best thing to do. If this was an issue, I'm not sure where all the 6 sites are, whether or not we're going to be able to, if those private owners may say no. We don't know, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So I'll be voting for the option 1.
So I have a question. Let's say you're going onto one of these sites. Is there like some initial things you can do and go, well, geez, if this initial survey is showing absolutely 0, is it worth at that point spending $16,000? Or, I mean, is it an all or nothing kind of thing, or is there steps that you can quickly say that this site's not a problem, and that only cost us $4,000 to find out that level, and it's...
Mayor Coombs, City Council, there are other provisions that we can do to test. We can do a less invasive soil sample in areas that we can identify that would have the highest potential of having some type of contamination. Another thing that we can do that would be less invasive for areas where there's a well site, a wellhead that was identified in a residential neighborhood. Some of those residential neighborhoods will have under-drain systems where we'll create a low-pressure zone where if there has been any type of mitigation or, migration of methane or any type of VOCs, we could probably detect it there with minimal intrusion, just a simple soil vapor sample, grab sample that way. So for areas where the wellhead is located in high residential neighborhoods, we do have some options. Another option is if all the residents say, no thanks, we don't want it, we don't want the burden of knowing, we can also look at possibly doing in the right-of-way or public easements where we can still collect that information.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you. The ways to monitor and check things are so much more sophisticated than they used to be, and that gives everybody a lot more confidence. I also agree with what Councilman Bagley and Councilman Santos have said, and Councilman Peck, that it's a public safety issue. We're not going to go onto private lands that nobody wants us to. But if people want us to, if my neighbor's house catches fire or blows up, it's going to affect my house too. So it's really an issue of community safety, and I think it's worth doing. So thank you.
Mayor, Council, also wanted to point out that another question that someone from the community asked is, well, what happens if you find something? Jason's working with Brad Skull. There is a fund that the state created to deal with these types of mitigation issues, and that was really, I think, in response to what happened in Trinidad, if I'm correct, or that area. And so what we would do is if we found something, then we would have to turn it over to the state because they then have the funding source. And that's assuming that the company no longer exists, because some of these wells that were plugged and abandoned were plugged and abandoned by companies that don't exist today. And so I just wanted council to know that it's not saying that we just have to keep following this. What we do is if we find something that we would notify the appropriate state agency so they can come in, and I think they're trying to set up meetings with them now.
That's correct. So there is actually money in the fund, and for 2017 it's been budgeted at $15.8 million, and so we're myself and Brad are working with the COGCC to try to figure out should we find a contaminated area, how the city goes about taking some of those funds and remediating the site.
Okay. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Well, hearing the discussion, I think I was being short-sighted, so I'm going to withdraw my motion. And
okay, I'll withdraw my second then.
And I'll move to allocate contingency funds for this oil and gas exploration.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Let's vote. Okay, that passes 7-0.
Mayor
Coombs, your next item is your general business presentation of the proposed human service funding allocation process for 2018. Karen Roney will present this.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Karen Roney, stretch, with the Community Services Department. And so this evening is really a follow-up conversation with City Council. You might recall back in the retreat that you had earlier this year in February, we had representatives from Corona Insights that provided the preliminary results of their Human Services Needs Assessment. And so tonight, I'm here to just briefly review those again, kind of the highlights, and then talk about what the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board is recommending for our approach for funding in 2018. So we will be starting that funding process right after this meeting. And what we really need to do is to have some direction from City Council to concur that the recommendation that we are making to Council is the way that you also believe that we should approach our 2018 funding process. So Council also probably recalls that that in our financial policy we allocate 2.07% of general fund revenues to support agencies in our community that are helping to individuals and families to meet some of their basic needs. We last conducted an assessment of what's happening in the community and what those needs are back in 2013, and so in 2016 we did want to go back in and look at and make an assessment of the needs of the Longmont community, and this is really the first time that we included in that effort primary data collection. And so we did contract with Corona Insights, and basically what they did is that they basically conducted an environmental scan. They surveyed low and moderate income residents in Longmont, targeting specific census tracts where we have a higher proportion of folks in low and moderate income are living. They also conducted interviews with some of our community organizations that serve people in our community to discuss trends and issues. And we also, in March of this year, conducted, I think, 4 community input sessions where we talked to agencies, we talked to residents in the community, and we asked them to help for them to tell us some additional stories behind the data. So the data is one thing, but what we really want to try to do is to learn really what's underneath that to help our advisory board make these recommendations that they're making here this evening. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly. You've seen this before. Some of the most prevalent social issues that Corona uncovered is certainly folks in our communities we have about 13% of our residents, or 12,000 people, that are experiencing poverty, and folks who are families that are Hispanic, females, and single parent families, households I should say, are disproportionately represent that 13% of residents. Housing is a challenge in our community. I don't think I need to tell you that, but certainly that's what they covered in some of the prevalent social issues, as well as jobs and opportunity for work and earning wages that are commensurate with what it costs to live here continues to be a challenge, where people are working, maybe working 2 or 3 jobs, and they just are not making enough money to be able to live in this community. Food insecurity was also something that was a higher prevalence than I think what we had seen in the past, where roughly 30% of low and moderate income households experience food insecurity, and 25% of the individuals indicated that they had run out of food in the past year and did not have money to get more. Some of the most prevalent needs that Corona uncovered had to do with health care and a variety of things, whether that is getting health insurance, being able to pay for health care, as well as dental care, mental health care, so kind of that whole area. And about 10,000 of our low and moderate income adults currently need this help, are trying to get help in this area. Housing, again, shows up again in terms of affordability, being able to pay for housing, and even people who are housed, just really being able to pay all their bills and to keep up with the escalating costs of housing in our community. The difference between what the needs are and the gaps in terms of people being able to get help for that is really what this is talked about in this slide. Again, you're going to see housing, where about 8,000 of our low and moderate income residents are needing help with finding affordable housing. They're not being able to get that. And the supply-demand gap for housing help is also very large in our community. This is an area where there is a significant gap, but the number of people experiencing this challenge is not as high. But folks that are needing help with legal assistance and folks who are needing help, maybe they are English language learners, are not having as much opportunity to get help learning English. And then we also asked our consultants to help us identify some of our most vulnerable residents in our community, and we talked about this a little earlier. So people obviously experiencing homelessness are highly vulnerable, don't have a lot of safety net available to them and getting their basic needs met. We find single parents are also more vulnerable in our community. Younger adults also came up as a vulnerable population, particularly in the area of housing and housing costs and being able to pay for food. People who have a disability also needing more assistance in the area of finding legal help. And then folks who are not citizens in our community, and we have talked about this in previous council meetings, but and a lot of individuals, and particularly adults, who do not have access to be able to get some of the federal benefits that are afforded to people who are citizens are struggling in this community. So the consultants recommended these general things that we should be looking at, and the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board had to figure out, okay, what do we do about that? So helping our residents find affordable housing was a recommendation, and pay for housing-related costs, helping people to pay for food, and addressing some of those gaps, again, having to do with affordable housing, helping people get English language skills, getting legal help. And these were the services that were recommended overall for addressing people who are the most vulnerable residents in our community. Again, housing continues to come up quite a bit, helping in terms of people who are homeless, single parents needing help with housing and childcare, young adults paying for housing and utilities, and you can see what I kind of talked about before in terms of people with disabilities and people who are not citizens. Again, I put an asterisk there because, as we talked about before, we are limited by law in terms of the type of assistance that we can provide for people who are not citizens of our community, but there are several things that we can do and we can provide assistance for, regardless of someone's immigration status. So I hit that pretty hard. You've heard it, or fast, I should say. You've heard that before, so I don't know if there's any questions about what was in the assessment. And if not, I'm really going to move into what we said what we are proposing to do about that. So so basically the overall framework that the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board is recommending is that we really focus on services that assist our low and moderate income residents, really to support their basic physical, social, economic, and emotional well-being needs. This really hasn't changed from what you've seen in prior years. We want to fund a range of safety net services, and that also includes services that help to prevent bad things from happening later in life, as well as to provide services that people need right now, adults need right now, to help support and really strengthen people's abilities to stabilize and thrive in our community as they best can. One of the changes that we're recommending, that instead of every 3 years we have a different recommendation for what services that we fund, is that we are recommending to line up our that we would be supporting what we would call the social determinants of health, those things that are best practice, that are researched, that basically said that people, in order for people to thrive and be stable in the community, that these are the kinds of services, or these are the kinds of pillars that they need to be able to thrive and be stable in our community, which has to do with housing stability, self-sufficiency and resiliency, food and nutrition, health and well-being, education and skill building, and safety services. So what we are recommending is that these are also, the social determinants of health are also things that the Boulder County has really organized their funding around. The City of Boulder is doing that. This provides us more leverage for other kinds of resources that are out there, and that when we update our needs assessment in the next 3 years or so, that we will be looking for, you know, where do we have holes or gaps in our safety net around these services, and not just saying that, well, we're going to fund a bunch of new or different services, but which of these areas do we maybe need to put some more emphasis and funding toward, given changes in trends or needs in our community. So here's really just a more of a definition of some of those things that I just talked about. These really aren't, as we looked at the agencies and the services that we fund today, really most every agency that we fund and every service that we support now do fit under these pillars of sustainability. So some of the funding assumptions that the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board agreed to is that we wanted to fund and we wanted to actually target funding on those areas with the highest impact in our community that were informed by the local needs assessment. So one of the things that we talked about is that we invested resources and time and energy into this needs assessment, and so we didn't want to say, oh, never mind, we're going to do this instead, but to really have that assessment be a guidepost for the recommendations that we are making. The second assumption was really around, we wanted to utilize different ways of and methods of allocating and directing the funding. And I believe that I talked a little bit about this in February, that in addition to the application process we use now, we really wanted to look at what are some other ways of allocating those funds to make sure that the dollars really went toward addressing the needs that our community has indicated are some of the greatest gaps and have the highest prevalence. So our approaches that I'm going to talk about in just a little bit is that we are recommending that it is appropriate to concentrate a larger portion of funding on a few key areas that, again, represent some of the greatest unmet needs or significant impact on the Longmont community. That we do develop and utilize a request for proposal process that identifies specific services and programs that we want to have provided, and then release a request for proposal rather than application to say we want to fund these particular services in our community, and to open that up for any entity that will give us a proposal for how they're going to provide those services. We also are recommending that where it's appropriate, and there is an area we think that's appropriate, that we look at funding an integrated service collaboration to address issues that are more regional, and that we will still allocate a portion of the funding using the competitive application process that we have, that we've used for the past several years in conjunction with City Boulder and Boulder County for some of those basic social determinants of health that I talked about. We also are looking at, we looked at some prioritization of where we think the most dollars should be invested based on the size of the problem in our community, the severity of the problem. We also are going to talk about the degree to which the city dollars will make a difference. In some cases, maybe there are other funding sources for that, or the amount of money that we would have available to address that problem is so small that maybe we not invest in some of those services like we had in the past. So to really look at what level of impact will our funding have, and to also be mindful of our most vulnerable residents when we're looking at priorities. So I did, so I'm ready, Sean. So could you help pass this out? So you might not be able to see this in a big way, and Sean is very good about reminding me that I need to make sure that y'all can see this information. So I did make a handout for you to also follow along. This was in your council communication. But this is basically what we are recommending for 2018 in terms of our funding approach. So this first impact area really has to do with housing. So as you heard me talk about, it's a big need and issue in our community, and really what we experienced, or what we heard from the assessment, is not only how helping people to be more rapidly rehoused, but we heard from a lot of people in the assessment that they are really struggling. They are maybe a paycheck or two away from, from a disaster or from losing their housing. And so what we want to look at, and this is something that we really haven't funded in this way in the past, is to really look at services that will help people maintain their housing. So whether that's rent assistance, mortgage assistance, beefing up our utility bill assistance, and these would be things that maybe would be on a longer term basis than I'm at risk of getting my, I've had my utilities shut off, and there's resources to get them turned back on. So we are looking at how we might need to provide some longer term assistance in these areas to help keep people housed. We want to keep people housed versus have people lose their housing, because it's a lot harder to get people back into housing. It's easier to keep them in housing. And then to look at other things that we haven't necessarily funded, which would be rental deposit assistance. So what we might do is there might be individuals in our community that they're making, that their wages are enough that they can pay for their housing, but they are having a hard time getting into housing because of the cost for rent deposits and those kinds of things. The other area that we possibly are exploring, and we're not limiting to this, but another one is really, some communities have a landlord incentive program, is that how do we outreach with some of our landlords around making some of the rental properties available. Could be, and again, we're researching this, but it might be that that if they offered a lower rent to lower income families, then we might have the opportunity with some of these dollars to come in and backfill the gap between maybe what they could get on the market and what people can afford to pay. Just again to help people maybe that are struggling, or help people get into housing, so they have that opportunity to stabilize. And we heard some of these suggestions from our community meetings when we were talking to people about what's the story underneath some of the data. The method of allocation that we are recommending here is really a request for proposal process. and it could be several. We don't know how many. And we are recommending that we set aside 30% of the money that we have available to allocate in 2018 to address housing. It was one of the most prevalent problems. It's the greatest unmet need among our residents based on the assessment that we conducted. So, again, this isn't a hard number. We might, we could modify that a little bit, but we really tried to take a stab at what would it require since it's the greatest challenge in our community. Any questions before I go on to the next? So I'll just keep going until you tell me to stop.
Councilmember Finley?
I have two quick questions. I've been not asking them because I was going to wait until you were all done, but since you asked.
Okay.
In the most vulnerable section, I didn't see senior citizens included in that. I don't know what my question is. It just seems like they ought to be there.
Mayor and Councilmember Finley, so they didn't necessarily show up in terms of their age, but I would say with the area in terms of older adults also tend to have maybe one or more disabilities, so that's probably where we would identify, again, disabilities can happen at all ages, but the greater opportunity for that is as we age. So that's where that particular population, I would say, would show up.
And I guess my second question is the percentages you have here for amount of set-aside funding. It would be interesting to know how that compares to what we've done in the past. Correct. It just would be interesting.
Right, correct. Right. So for in terms of this housing, we really haven't provided a lot of funding for these things in the past, so that would really be new, but certainly want to get into the next, which is about homeless services. We did at least initially look at what is, how much have we supported for those services and how much more we think we might need to support. So yeah, we will be looking at that and probably making some revisions.
And the housing dollar was on the construction side in terms of what they allocated in the past.
Right, and these are not, these are programs.
Councilmember Moore, do you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Mayor Coombs. Utility bill payments, we talked, or at least I've asked to see if there's another way we can administer our assistance for that through our by a monthly management of that bill for help people that need that help.
Right.
I'd just like to point that out as another alternative.
Right.
Although I'm not opposed to that, I just want to say that, if we could give people an electric bill break every month rather than once a year, I think that helps our budgeting process. And there's other ways, there's a lot of good ways to qualify them for that on an annual basis. Second question is Homeless Management Board. I did a quick Google search and it didn't come up with anything. What is it?
If can I just answer that by going into the next explanation?
Okay.
I will. Yeah, you're not going to. You aren't going to find it, but I'm just ready to talk about that if there are any questions.
Okay.
Okay. So then I'm going to move into this next area, which is the integrated homeless service delivery system. So this is, and I think we talked about this a little bit at the retreat. So what would be new? Because this is new. So the City of Boulder County, and City of Longmont are working together to create the integrated homeless service delivery system. And so, oops. And so what we're trying to do, and this might address at some level, not totally, Council Members Peck comments earlier about what are we doing. We believe that if as a region, if we are going to make a difference in people who are struggling with homelessness, that we have to really do something. We have to have a different approach than what we have had in the past. And so this is really what we are working on, that we are really reorienting our homeless services. We are looking at a common approach among our communities about how we're going to address homelessness. And we're starting with a single adult population, so we're not, and you remember we also did the assessment that we talked about at the retreat about our, what is the scenario in our community about single adult homelessness and what should we be doing differently. And so we have basically these three governments that have come really to generally the same conclusion about service philosophies and principles and levels of service that we should be funding in order to help primarily at this point our single adult homeless population to be stably housed. So this is the system flow, if you will. So what's different about this system is that everyone who is seeking assistance with because they are homeless, they will go through a coordinated entry process, because right now people there are different agencies have different ways that they screen individuals. Some individuals don't get any kind of screening. We don't have an assessment. So this is really about to utilize a standardized screening tool throughout Boulder County and an assessment process that would basically, we would be looking at funding or identifying two different tracks of services, all right? So if you go to the right, which is the housing services, so people who had the highest level of needs. So folks that have been homeless probably for the longest period of time, they have multiple issues, could have mental health issues, substance abuse issues. They have a lot of need. They struggle. They're living on the streets and they don't have stable housing. So the stable housing path is what we identified on the right side. Individuals who are screened to have a pretty high need and need really stable housing services would be referred on that path. The VI SPDAT is it's basically a vulnerability index assessment that is used throughout the state and actually the nation to really look more deeply at what's the level of need of an individual who's chronically homeless. We are referring them to program-based shelter. At this point, for Boulder County, that will be the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless. What we are working on is the Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, which is 160 beds, would be open year-round. That individuals who are referred to the program-based shelter would be able to stay there as long as they needed. So if that was several months, it could be up to a year. But individuals would be able to stay at the what we call program-based shelter. They'd be hooked up with case management, and there would be someone working with them intensely on getting them to the level of stability so that they can have an exit out of homelessness, meaning that they might be they can move into permanent supportive housing, like we have at the suites right now and several locations throughout Boulder County. They might be able to go into transitional housing, like what we have available at the In-Between. Or they might be a candidate, once they get stabilized, for rapid rehousing, which means they would be eligible for resources to get them into private housing options. But the folks that have the greatest needs need many more resources to help them stabilize so that they have an exit out of homelessness and into more stable housing.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. And you might get into this, Karen. I got a question with, how is this going to be, what's the review period? So after 3-5 years of looking at this integrated homeless service delivery system, how is it going to be graded as far as its success or failure? Are those that enter the screening,
Right.
you know, what's going to happen if they say, screw this, I'm not going to do this? So how's that going to work?
That's a great question. And there are going to be people who say, you know,
right, I'm sure there will be.
You know, this isn't for me. So the thing that, so that is also part of what we are working on is this county collaborative in terms of evaluation tools. This model is a best practice model. It has been researched. If you go on the National Alliance to End Homelessness, this is a best practice model and what many communities throughout the nation are doing. We also need to have our own set of evaluation criteria to really look at how is it making a difference?
Right, because I mean, if we're looking at setting aside 20%, and you know, it's nice to have Boulder County and the city of Boulder in on this as well, but after a review, you know, there needs to be a review period that if it's not, you know, if we have more people dropping, you know, one, not getting in, or two, dropping out, you know, I would hope that the council at that time would reassess whether or not this delivery system is actually working. So I mean, that's my concern about putting at least that amount of money, 20%-ish, I understand, ish, that's my concern, is that we go through all this, what's that time period of review? So just...
So I would say, I think, Mayor and Council Member Santos, it is, so the Homeless Management Board, the governance board that Council Member Moore talked about. So that group will continue to be evaluating and assessing this work as we go along. We don't want to, you know, continue to invest in something that isn't working. So we need to be tweaking it along the way, making modifications, and being willing to change things up as we need to change things up. So, and we realize that this looks good in, I'm going to say on paper because that sounds dismissive. I don't mean that to sound, but we know that there is, that this is a best practice model and it makes sense in theory, but then there's practice. And we know that it won't be as quite this easy and simple in practice. So on the other side of this flow chart, if you will, is again is something that is new, and we're calling those diversion or navigation services. And basically what that means is that these are individuals who don't need the level of assistance as someone who scores higher, who has more needs, who's been homeless for a longer period of time. So these would be people maybe who have you know, recently lost their housing, and they need help to get back into housing. These might be individuals who are traveling through our community and, you know, heard this is a great place to be, but they don't have any supports here. Or it could be folks that, you know, is what we, I don't know if Alice is still here. She is. So you know, what Hope would say is that, you know, we serve people who are, you know, who are working and they are living in their cars. So this could also be in this diversion paths. These are folks who don't need shelter necessarily. They need housing. They're working and they need extra supports to get into housing rather than being housed in their vehicle. So this is the area that we'll be looking at. What is that going to look like in Longmont? You know, we'll be working with some of our existing providers to talk about really these diversion services, and and to really further help determine what's needed to get folks in housing. So it could be when we talk about navigation assistance. So these might be folks that maybe they need landlord-tenant mediation. Maybe they need rapid rehousing dollars. Maybe they need, we're developing that suite of navigation services. These are also individuals that might need short-term sheltering, if you will. So they, so maybe because this is not going to be necessarily as easy. It's not like, okay, I'm having a problem and in a day I can get you into housing. Sometimes that might take a little longer. So we realize that these are folks that are needing shorter term support, but they're not needing the long-term support as in the program-based shelter. It also could be individuals who maybe they have no connection in this community, and what we might indicate is we would have people working, we'd have case managers working with individuals, and it could be, so where's the last community where you came from, or where you still have family or friends or support, and can we help get you linked back successfully to a community where you have some support if you really don't have any support here. So those would be, so those are really kind of new services as we have talked about that. And we have a multidisciplinary from the 3 different governments that are working together to help figure out this, how we're going to implement this. We have a governing board that used to be the old 10-year plan to end homeless board that was appointed by Boulder County. And so those individuals on the management board would be looking at funding. We're looking at, okay, so if these are the services that we're going to offer, what kind of funding do we need to bring to the table in order to support these kinds of services? And I think for Longmont, since we probably have the smaller amount of dollars, it does provide us an opportunity for our dollars to be leveraged with some of the other communities to help make sure that we have the services that we need to support program-based shelter as well as diversion services here in Longmont. And we are still working on this effort. We're working with Warp Speed. Our target for, obviously there's a October 1st, which is the beginning of the kind of the emergency sheltering system. We are targeting October 1st for being able to implement many portions of this system. We realize that we might have to have some transition planning, but again, we have representatives that are working on that. We also have, as part of this system, kind of a management board, and those would be represented by providers throughout Boulder County that are also providing consultation around these implementation strategies and what do they think will work, what are we not considering, and how do we really make this a system that together we can really work hard to help get people into stable housing and move away from managing people in homelessness. It's not good for any individual to be living, to not have a house, to not have a home. It's not good for individuals. It's certainly not good for our community. And we our belief and hard work is really moving toward having this integrated system that we all are working toward with because the other piece, I guess, to Council Member Santos's question too, is that we also would be looking at a new data management system. So Boulder County has been working on what they call the data management warehouse, so that basically all of these providers, we're putting data into one system that we all share. The data is by individual, about individuals, and we can track their progress. We have more done than I thought. So they can track their progress with real-time data in terms of how is this person responding, what services are helpful, maybe what services that we might need to change. And we are recommending at this point that 20% of the dollars in Longmont's allocation go to support this this system. Questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. And so then that leaves us 50% of that set aside, and this would be allocated through our regular competitive application process. We are, which would be released to the community. We are targeting for the first part of August, first to mid part of August, and we are basically indicating that 30% of the funding to support these areas that I have here, that would be, again, housing stability, food and nutrition, and health and well-being. And how we determined that, as we looked at the results of the assessment, we looked at which of these services address people who are most vulnerable, what's the severity of the problem, so that we could determine, these probably have a little bit higher priority needs than the next set of services. And the housing stability, because obviously you saw that earlier. So this is really to, this is really to support others who need housing that aren't in the single adult category necessarily. So we have the Atwood shelter that provides family services, family shelter, the in-between that provides transitional housing. So some of our housing providers would be accessing dollars through this competitive process, not necessarily through the Homeless Integrated Service Plan. So 30% of the funding to go toward these areas, and the remaining 20% would then support the remaining areas for education and skill building, which includes certainly early education as well as skill training for adults, really supporting self-sufficiency. And we didn't really have for safety, we certainly talked about safe and supportive environments for children and adults. And this is also where we brought in where the assessment indicated that there were, that some of our vulnerable residents need more legal assistance than others. And so we put safety and justice. So just to make sure that there really was that opportunity to be able to address what we heard and from our community when we conducted the needs assessment. So that's what we're proposing from the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. Common application will be released in August, as just mentioned. Right now, for the for the housing help area, the 30%, we are researching what particular programs and services that we want to will fund with that. What are going to make the most impact? We're doing some follow-up interviews with some of the agencies to find out what are their clients experiencing in this area and what will be most helpful. We intend to release that RFP process in the fall, probably in September, October at the latest. And then we are continuing to work with that integrated housing or integrated homeless system, the governance and implementation team, to really flesh out what are all the services, particularly in that navigation and diversion side of things, that we will be funding through that integrated process. And that is likely to be, those would be dollars that our advisory board will not necessarily be allocating, but that would be allocating through that governance board that city staff is on, as well as county staff, housing authority staff, a variety of other folks that are really looking at how do we best invest the dollars from all three communities to really support that system.
Councilmember Santos?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. It seems I'm harping on this integrated homeless service delivery system. Of the 20%, how much of that is actually going to help people instead of going towards building this server or program? And so I would like to know eventually, how much of that 20% is going towards
Direct service.
helping direct services to help people, and how much of that is actually going into salaries, computers, and what have you? Because I am always willing to help people, but the money's got to get to the people. I know there's always administrative costs and things of that nature, but if a great portion of that 20% is going towards administrative costs or things of that nature, I have a great concern.
And I think I would say, Councilmember Santos and members of council, is I would say that the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board shares that same interest.
I'm sure.
Is that, and you know, the services aren't provided, as you mentioned, you know, without some level of overhead. I think the two things that are hopeful is that we are leveraging and consolidated all these dollars, and in many cases, these are providers that. It might be that they already have that system in place and they need more dollars for additional services. They might not need additional staff. Mm-hmm. And we're also looking at which entity might fund additional staff and overhead, what might go into direct service. So I think the interest is because folks that we are serving here need a lot of resources, and that's really where those dollars need to go.
And I know there's at least a couple of members of the Housing and Human Services Board here. I just wanted to make that comment because that's always a great concern that, you know, when we get, even the city, when we get money in from grants and things, I know a portion of that has to go to administrative costs and things of that nature, but what is the greatest portion of the money that that 20% are going to direct to go directly to people and help them?
Councilmember Peck.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Karen, you mentioned the Atwood and in between as transitional housing and housing that you use, but there are a couple of hotels on Main Street that working people live in but are really, really struggling. Are those places part of the funding? Can they apply for funding as well? Or are you only looking at the ones that are under either LHA or under your program?
I think it depends on, you know, so particularly with the integrated system, I think we would look at, you know, what kind of money do we need to provide for, you know, short-term assistance. So, I mean, I think any housing option is open for support through any one of these processes. I guess I don't see anything that's left out. It's really about where is the best source for support.
Okay, I just don't want everything. I just want an equal playing table for all low-income housing support within the city. Thank you.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. So I'm still not clear what the Homeless Management Board is, how they're formed, who's on it. Are they professional staff? Are they appointments from elected officials? Or, I mean, it's kind of a big black hole as far as who's going to determine who gets what amounts of funding on this homeless service delivery system, which I like the idea, just to start off there.
One moment. I might have so what, and I don't have a slide here, and I apologize, and I will absolutely provide some follow-up if that would be helpful. But I have. So in essence, that there would be this governing board, this homeless service governing board. That is going to be a board appointed by the Boulder County Commissioners. That takes place of the 10-year plan to end homelessness board. And so there's been a preliminary identification of who's on that governing board. That would be the head of Housing and Human Services for the county, the head of the county's community services, the head of Boulder's Human Services, I would be on that board as head of community services. There would be housing authority directors from Boulder County, City of Boulder, City of Longmont, a representative from the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, and there could be a couple others because I'm not finding my sheet. So, but those would be basically, we would have to apply and be appointed by the Board of County Commissioners. And then that governing board would then be, responsible for making recommendations on basically agencies. Basically, it's providers right now throughout the county that would be on this, what we call the Homeless Management Board, not the governing board, but the management board, that again would provide consultation around services, what's working, what needs to be changed, so that the governance board could make those changes. So the governance board, it has responsible for oversight and also for recommending funding for the system. The management board is consisted of providers. And again, I can get you that list. I just don't have my hands on it, but it's around a 15 member board. They certainly represent agencies, but they also represent people in the community, so people with lived experience. We're looking for faith community representatives and some others. So it's really a combination.
Councilmember Bagley?
Did that?
It's an interesting concept, and I like going down the path. Have there been any metrics determined yet, or will we wait for that board to be formed?
I think I think we are. So yes, we'll be waiting. We don't have the metrics yet, but we'll be working on that.
All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Bagley?
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I got it. So what direction do you need from us? As always, good work. Thank you, et cetera. But what direction, if any, do you need from council?
Can we go forth and embrace this approach to allocating funding in 2018?
So moved.
I'll second that. Councilmember Christensen.
Yeah, thank you for so much really helpful information. Corona Insights did a wonderful job of compiling many, many different sources of information. My concern is because all of this, virtually all of this, really only refers to people over 18, and that's what the homeless and the housing refers to, and you're starting off with single adults, which makes sense. However, walk me through what would actually happen to a family. I mean, just for example, a family that was made homeless by domestic violence, and what would happen to them, where they would go, who would help them, just as an example. Say a woman and 2 children.
So, Mayor and Council Member Christensen, so right now, those in that family that you talked about would likely be served through the safe shelter of the St. Vrain Valley. Right. And so they would be getting assistance that way. They have case managers that would help the family. And then we would likely be looking at having a representative of the safe shelter. I'm just safe shelter. Would be on this management board, and so we would still be looking at how we are providing assistance and an exit out of that scenario, and that could also be services they could access through this other RFP process that I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because that's what we're hearing from the in-between, safe shelter, Atwood shelter, where they're saying we have families that we're serving, and they've been here for 2 years, or they've been here for 9 weeks, but we don't have an exit for them, housing for them. So that's where the the other dollars, the RFP for housing services, where
Okay.
that could come into play, so that we would really help being able to provide assistance to get some of those families housed and out
Okay.
of the system that they're in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we've got a motion. It's been seconded. Let's vote. That passes 7-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now it's time for final call. Public invited to be heard. Is anybody from the public like to come down and speak?
Hi, Mayor and Council. John Coe, 1899 3rd Avenue. I just wanted to talk briefly on your item 8I, the oil and gas right-of-way situation. A recent experience, I have an abandoned water line that goes through my property. It's actually like a 20-inch ditch pipe, and it's not on my title. And I would believe it should be, but very similarly to these gas lines, it seems like the title company is responsible for these old abandoned lines. And so it seems like these things should go back to the title company should they be found. And getting back to that, the letter that I shared with you last week, I believe, from Mr. Slavin, was in response to American Title Company, and I actually contacted their local office when I was trying to research the information that I provided you. And I got kind of an interesting answer from them, which I thought I'd share with you as well, which was I contacted the Boulder County office of American Title, and they were telling me that in order to discuss this 97 issue where they were involved, that I have to contact their local or their national office, which I found interesting because their national office obviously is not regulated by the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. So that seems like a bad situation where they're only a sales office and they can take care of selling things but not servicing their products. So I would suggest that in this situation that the same information might apply, and that this information, probably even in the city-owned real estate, would probably be something where these abandoned pipes should be on the titles. And back to my abandoned pipe, the only downside of that was it basically dried out my land because it's a drainage issue and not necessarily a water supply issue. And so watering my lawn there didn't do any good because it basically just drains into this pipe. But the city engineers have been very good, and I'm trying to repair this before the winter time because it's a winter drainage. It's really an issue with this drainage pipe, and the city engineers have been responsive to my situation there. So thank you, and I thought I would relate the information about this title company and about this maybe being a title company issue. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak?
Ron Gallegos, 2455 Spencer. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I was at a Park and Rec board meeting last night, and one of the neighbors in my neighborhood, which is Garden Acres, raised an issue. It had been an issue that I had kind of observed as well. I walk the park every day. It's about 2 miles. Recently, we had a series of competitions there that I think are great for the community because they brought a lot of people in. The downside for the neighborhood and for those of us that walk the park is they created an inordinate amount of trash. So much trash that on Monday, after all these sessions and the tournaments had ended, the trash was there and they were there. The trash mountains of plastic bottles and food containers and old tennis shoes and broken equipment. It took staff, and they would do a good job at that park, until Thursday to get caught up. So the question we kind of have is, these folks, we like them in our community. We like them spending money in our taverns and our restaurants and whatnot. But in one sense, they're the trash causers, and this trash really should leave when they leave. If you go to any of the functions that Boulder County puts on, you have to have a regular recycling stream. You know, they have the divisions there, and you recycle this, and this is compost, and this is whatnot. But at the good part of the end of those series or events is the people that are putting on the events have to literally pack up all their trash and take it with them. And as neighbors, we would kind of like that. I mean, I can appreciate that, like after the 4th of July, some of us walk through the park and pick up the fireworks and whatnot. It happens once a year, and people get kind of, you know, happy. That's fine. But when we focus on a tournament where a lot of people are going to be there, and we know there's going to be a lot of trash, and the carrying capacity of the park is then impacted, I think this is a 10-minute solution, because it's really a 10-minute problem. And if we can make it go away, I would encourage you. Thank you.
All right, is there anybody else that'd like to speak at public invited to be heard? All right, I'm going to close final call public invited to be heard. City Manager, any comments? Oh, excuse me. I got ahead of myself. So council and mayor comments first. Councilmember Finley.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. I have gotten away from, but wanted to start once again my business of the week. There's a new business in town called The Kitchen Company, and this is very exciting to those of us who enjoy cooking. It's at 464 Main Street, and I'm excited about this, and I think everyone should be as well, and you should go down and visit The Kitchen Company at 464 Main Street.
Councilmember Santos.
Thank you, Mayor Coombs. Harold, when events are done at city facilities, because I've done them before myself, part of the fee, if I'm not mistaken, is also for Public Works to come through with garbage patrol. Am I right in that?
I think so. That's part of it. I think it's also the responsibility of the event organizers to clean up. I have an email out to Jeff Friesder, Bob Allen, and David Bell to pull all of that together.
Yeah, because when Vicki and I did were the chairs for the Relay for Life, there's a whole process when we used Roosevelt Park, and there were a couple times that we had to call city facilities to come out and, you know, yes, garbage is generated, but that's part of what I understand of renting the facility for. So I'm just questioning. Actually, we did. There was a softball tournament that I was in Boulder recently over off of Valmont. I was surprised that it was just garbage cans. There was no for even being in Boulder. There was no compost. There was no recycle. It was all garbage. And I talked to the organizer about that. I was just surprised, and that's just how apparently the city of Boulder works and operates that facility. But I did ask that question. I go, so are you responsible for the rest of the junk that gets left? He goes, no, we pay a fee and the city provides that. I was just wondering if we were relatively the same.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues here, what I also heard is it may not have been in the, so they rent the ball fields,
right.
And that's what the fee's for. Mm-hmm. What I don't know, and this is what I need to talk to staff about, is sometimes teams may go to other locations in the park that aren't necessarily the ball field, and that may be part of the problem. So what I want to do is get with those folks, and then we'll provide council with an email update in terms of what we look at and how we approach it.
Right. It's just I just remember paying a fee and noting that was part of the service for the fee. Thank you.
So I've just got a quick question. I think this might be for Eugene, but a past mayor can't indemnify a city for all time and eternity by a handshake deal that I'm going to do this, and basically, when you have new mowing standards or new ordinances that conflict with that, to me that's not legally binding. So I just wanted to get a read from you on that situation.
Mayor and Council, Eugene May, City Attorney. So speaking in generalities, I have not looked into the specific documents mentioned in public invited to be heard, but when council adopts standards, a single council member cannot change those standards. It would have to be done by the body.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And I think to add to that, and Bob Allen was texting me, I think when we look at that, if council will remember, we had similar conversations on another section
Right,
of the Rough and Ready, and we went out with council and took a tour. I think Councilmember Peck, I don't know if you were on the council then or not, but and we talked about the mowing standards that were changed in 2009 in the process that we went through. We can get Bob Allen to resend that information to council one more time on that issue. That's what he was sending to me, but very similar issue to what we dealt with on the other property.
Okay. All right, now any more city council? City manager, any remarks?
No comments, Mayor, Council.
City attorney, any remarks?
No comments, Mayor.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned.